When I signed the lease for apartment 3B, it didn't feel like a new chapter. It felt like an intermission. I just left a year-long relationship that crashed harder than my thesis proposal, and I needed somewhere cheap, quiet, and uninvolved. The ad read, sublet, furnished, utilities included, immediate move-in. I should have known that kind of luck came with strings. My ex, Nathan, had stormed out of our shared apartment 6 weeks earlier, taking half our furniture and all my emotional stability with him. We'd met in the psychology department's orientation, both ambitious first-year grad students with matching coffee thermoses and identical copies of Trauma and Recovery tucked under our arms. The symmetry felt like fate then. By our third date, we were finishing each other's citations. By our 6th month, we'd moved in together. By our first anniversary, the fights had become a nightly ritual, each one cutting deeper than the last. "You're suffocating me, Sandra," he'd said that final night, pacing our cramped living room like a caged animal. "It's like you're always watching, always analyzing. I'm not one of your case studies." The irony wasn't lost on me as I stood in apartment 3B's empty living room, the landlord, Mr. Gaines, shifting impatiently beside me. He was a slight man with thinning hair and perpetually damp palms. "The guy before you, Henry, moved to Prague for a year," he explained, glancing down at the paperwork with a tired shrug. Film work, I repeated, running my fingers along the windowsill. A thin layer of dust came away on my fingertips. "That's what he said. Documentaries or something." Mr. Gaines waved his hand dismissively. "Place comes as is. Furniture stays. Rent's due first of the month. Any problems? You call the super, not me. I just manage the paperwork." The place was small. White walls, creaky floors, and the faint smell of old tape adhesive. But it was mine. I was a psychology grad student at NYU, juggling trauma theory, part-time tutoring, and what I told myself were manageable panic attacks. Apartment 3B gave me what I needed: isolation, no roommates, no parties, no ex-boyfriend showing up drunk at 2 a.m. It was a sanctuary. I signed the lease that afternoon and moved in the next day. My possessions fit into 8 cardboard boxes and 3 garbage bags. The furniture, a sagging couch, a desk with uneven legs, a bed frame that groaned with every movement, seemed to absorb my belongings rather than accommodate them. I arranged my psychology textbooks by subject on the rickety bookshelf, hung my clothes in the closet that smelled faintly of mothballs, and set my laptop on the desk by the window. For the first few days, the only sound was the hum of the fridge and the occasional dog barking through the open window. I unpacked slowly, arranged my books by subject, and started to feel normal again. My daily routine settled into a comforting rhythm. Wake at 7, shower, grab coffee from the bodega downstairs, classes until 4, library until 7, then back to 3B for instant noodles and academic journals until I fell asleep. On the 4th night, I dreamt of Nathan. In the dream, he stood in our old apartment, mouth moving but no sound coming out. I woke with a start, my heart racing. And that's when I heard it for the first time, the crying. It wasn't loud, more like the tail end of a sob, like someone trying to stifle it. The sound was so faint I thought I might have imagined it, some remnant of my dream clinging to consciousness. I sat up, straining to hear through the darkness. Silence. I convinced myself it was nothing. Pipes settling, maybe, or a neighbor through the walls. Old buildings carried sound weird. I lay back down, pulling the covers tight around me, and eventually drifted back to sleep. The next morning, I mentioned it casually to Mrs. Petrovich in 3A, an elderly woman who'd lived in the building for 40 years. "Crying?" "No, dear," she said, shaking her head. "It's a quiet floor, just me and now you. 3C has been empty for months." "What about upstairs? Or downstairs?" "Upstairs is a lovely Chinese couple, very quiet. Downstairs is storage." She patted my arm. "Old buildings make noises. You'll get used to it." I nodded, pushing away the unease settling in my stomach. But on the 3rd night, I woke up at 2:13 a.m., and it was coming from the west wall. the one with no adjoining apartment. It lasted less than a minute. Then silence. In the harsh light of morning, I convinced myself it was nothing. Stress. Loneliness. Typical grad student paranoia. I buried myself in my thesis research, manifestations of trauma in everyday perception, and tried to ignore the growing sense that something wasn't right. But things started changing. I noticed the furniture was off by inches every time I returned from class. My toothbrush was damp even when I hadn't used it. And once I found my laptop open with the camera light on, something I never do, I chalked it up to exhaustion. Sleep deprivation could cause memory lapses, and I'd been averaging 5 hours a night between nightmares and deadlines. On Thursday, my advisor commented on the dark circles under my eyes. "You look like you've seen a ghost, Sandra," Dr. Chen said, peering at me over her glasses. "Are you sleeping?" "Just settling into a new place," I replied, forcing a smile, still getting used to the noises. That night, I deliberately turned off my laptop, closed it, and placed it in my desk drawer before bed. When I woke up at 3 a.m., it was on the desk, open, the camera light glowing in the darkness. I brought it up with the landlord the next day, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "Mr. Gaines, I think someone might have been in my apartment while I was out." He looked up from his phone, expression caught between irritation and boredom. "What makes you say that?" "Things have been moved. My laptop was open when I left it closed. I heard noises." He shrugged and said, "Place is old. Maybe you bumped it." He offered to change the locks, but never did. I let it go, convincing myself I was slipping. I started taking photos of my apartment before leaving. The position of the furniture, the angle of my laptop, the arrangement of dishes in the sink. When I returned, I'd compare the current state to the images on my phone. The differences were subtle but undeniable. The desk chair rotated 15 degrees. Books rearranged on the shelf. My coffee mug moved from the left side of the sink to the right. I developed rituals. I placed a single strand of hair across the doorframe when I left, invisible unless you were looking for it. I balanced coins on doorknobs. I drew marks on my toothbrush with a Sharpie to see if it had been used. Each test confirmed what I already knew but couldn't accept. Someone was in my apartment when I wasn't. One afternoon, I dropped a pen behind the radiator under the window. When I reached down to grab it, my fingers brushed something cold and hard. I pulled out a tiny black camera, no larger than a lighter, wedged into a custom-made nook. It was angled at my bed. My breath caught. I stared at the device in my palm, bile rising in my throat. It wasn't some cheap spy gadget from a novelty shop. This was professional-grade surveillance equipment, the kind used by security firms or police. I checked the bathroom next, then the bookshelf, then behind the clock. 3 more, each one aimed, each one precisely hidden. That was the first time I locked myself in the bathroom and cried. The panic attack hit like a freight train, lungs constricting, vision tunneling, sweat cold on my skin. I sat on the tile floor back against the bathtub, gasping for air between sobs. Images flashed through my mind. Me sleeping, showering, changing clothes, all while someone watched. I should have left. But I was broke, and every other apartment in my budget was either rat-infested or deep in Queens, so I did what any dumb student would do. I removed the cameras, stored them in a drawer, and convinced myself they were leftovers from the last tenant, some voyeur who'd bailed out. I told myself the past was over. "It's Henry's equipment," I whispered to my reflection that night, the bathroom mirror fogged from my shower. "He's in Prague now. He can't hurt you." But that night, I heard the crying again. Closer this time. And something else, the faint sound of film spooling. By morning, the crying was a memory. But the cameras weren't. I couldn't stop staring at the drawer where I'd hidden them. I skipped class and brought one to the campus library, plugging it into a school computer. The screen blinked once, then revealed grainy, monochrome footage. My bed. Me sleeping. The timestamp read March 14th, 2:16 a.m. That was 2 nights ago. I watched as my own body turned in the sheets, unaware of the camera's quiet gaze. I fast-forwarded. Around 2:30 a.m., a shadow moved in the frame, just the edge of it, long, angular. I yanked out the USB and left the library shaking. I called the landlord from a campus phone booth, my fingers trembling as I dialed. "Are you absolutely sure Henry left the country?" I asked, forcing calm into my voice. He sounded annoyed. "Look, I just managed keys. The guy said Prague, he wired the rent, and that's that. What's going on?" I paused. If I told him, he'd probably think I was nuts. "Nothing," I said, "just asking." Back in the apartment, I tried to convince myself I was overreacting. I even Googled hidden camera rentals and found dozens of stories about leftover equipment. But none of those stories included crying through the walls, or the moment I returned from the library to find my bedroom light on, though I'd turned it off, or the strange message scrawled in the fogged-up bathroom mirror after my shower. "You're interesting." The words had appeared as if by magic, revealed by the steam, finger drawn in the glass before my shower, invisible until the heat exposed them. I stared at the message, my reflection distorted behind the dripping letters, and felt something inside me break. "This isn't happening," I whispered, wiping the mirror clean with a towel. "This can't be happening." But it was, and deep down I knew exactly what was happening. Someone was watching me. Someone was in my apartment. Someone had written me a message while I was gone, knowing I'd see it when I showered. I went to the police that evening. The officer was polite but skeptical. "You didn't see anyone. You don't have footage of someone breaking in. Sounds like something the last tenant did, maybe." I showed him the camera. He nodded, unimpressed. "Keep your doors locked. We'll file a report." That was it. I left the station feeling invisible, disposable. Another hysterical woman with an overactive imagination. I'd spent 2 years studying trauma responses, and here I was, being gaslit by the very system designed to protect me. That night, I pushed my dresser in front of the bedroom door. It was a cheap IKEA piece, more symbolic than secure, but it gave me the illusion of control. I left the hallway light on, sat in bed holding a kitchen knife, waiting. The crying came again, louder this time, definitely coming from the wall between the bedroom and bathroom. And then I heard a whisper, low and close, as if someone were right behind the drywall. "Don't be scared. It's only the beginning." I screamed, dropped the knife, and fumbled for my phone. I called my friend Marcy and begged her to let me stay over. She hesitated. She had roommates, but I must have sounded bad because she said yes. I shoved some clothes into a bag ready to run, but when I opened the front door, there was something resting on the floor. A VHS tape, no label, no note. Just my name scrawled in Sharpie across the plastic. Sandra. I left it there and ran. Marcy's couch was lumpy and narrow, but it felt like a fortress compared to 3B. Her apartment buzzed with the normal sounds of people living, laughter behind closed doors, music from the next room, clinking dishes. I didn't tell her everything. Just said my place had bad vibes and a weird neighbor. She nodded sympathetically, but didn't press. "You can stay as long as you need," she said, handing me a blanket that smelled of fabric softener. "Just don't mind Ricky and Jen. They're loud but harmless." I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing the tape's name in my head. Sandra. Someone had made it for me. Someone wanted me to watch it. "You okay?" Marcy asked the next morning, finding me still awake, staring at the ceiling. "You look like hell." "Just stressed," I lied. "Thesis deadline coming up." She didn't believe me. I could see it in her eyes, but she let it go. "I've got class until 4. Help yourself to anything in the fridge." The moment she left, I felt exposed again. The logical part of my brain insisted I was safe. 3 roommates, 5th floor, security door. But logic had abandoned me days ago. I called Dr. Chen and explained I needed an extension on my thesis draft. I didn't mention the cameras or the voice or the tape. Just said I was dealing with housing issues. Take the time you need, she said. But Sandra, if something's wrong, you can talk to me. I almost broke then. Almost told her everything. But what would I say? That I'd been living in a horror movie for the past week? That someone was watching me through the walls? She'd recommend psychological evaluation, not help. The next day, I returned to the apartment during daylight. I needed answers or closure. The VHS was still there, waiting like a sick gift. I picked it up, turned it in my hands. No return address, no handwriting on the back. Just my name, bold and exact. Against my better judgment, I borrowed Marcy's ancient combo TV and VCR and played it. The screen was black at first, then static, then a dim shot of my bedroom, the same camera angle from before. Except this time the bed was empty, and the person holding the camera wasn't behind the wall. They were in the room. I watched, frozen, as the footage panned slowly toward the bathroom door. It was open. I could see the mirror fogged up. Then movement, barely a flicker, like someone ducking just out of view. The tape cut out. A new scene began. This one was darker, grainier. It showed a crawl space, wood beams, dust. Someone was crawling through it, breathing hard. Then the camera stopped, turned, pointed into a tiny rectangular gap. Through it, I saw something impossible, the back of my own bookshelf. My hand shook as I shut the TV off. He was in the walls. I tore through the apartment, knocking on every surface, listening for hollowness. I found one behind the closet, a narrow panel. I pried it open with a screwdriver. Inside was a passage barely wide enough for a man to crawl through. The smell hit me first, stale sweat, mold, and dust. I pointed my flashlight inside. The crawl space twisted and turned, ending in a downward shaft I couldn't see the bottom of. There were greasy handprints along the beams. I called the police again. This time I demanded they come. 2 officers showed up, unimpressed until I showed them the cameras and the panel in the closet. They exchanged looks, one muttering, "Jesus Christ." They called for backup. I stood outside, arms wrapped around myself, as they explored the shaft with floodlights and body cams. 15 minutes later, one came back up, pale. "There's a network of tunnels back there," he said. "Someone's been living inside the walls." They didn't find him, but they found what he left behind. Blank tapes labeled with women's names, photos taken from odd angles, lists with dates and routines, and at the very back, near a small sleeping mat, a single phrase written on the wall in red ink. "This one's going to be perfect." Officer Reyes, a woman with tired eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, took my statement in the back of a patrol car. "How long have you lived here?" she asked, pen poised over her notepad. "Just over 2 weeks," I replied, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. "And you never saw anyone physically enter your apartment?" I shook my head. "Just noises. Things moved. The cameras." She nodded, writing something down. "We'll need forensics to go through everything. This isn't a simple breaking and entering. This is..." She trailed off, looking at the building. "This is something else." They moved me out the same night. The cops offered a hotel voucher, but I crashed with Marcy again, this time telling her everything. She sat frozen as I played the tape. This is a movie," she whispered. "A nightmare version of the Truman Show." I tried to laugh, but nothing came out. The man, Henry, if that was even his name, had lived inches away from me, breathing the same air, watching. Not once, not occasionally, but constantly. Detective Carnes called me the next day. "We're treating this as a major case," he said. "The crawl spaces connect to at least 3 other apartments, all previously rented to single women." "Have you found him?" I asked, my fingers tightening around the phone. "Not yet, but we have a name. The real estate company had a copy of his driver's license. We're running it through the system." I hung up and sat on Marcy's couch, staring at nothing. The nightmare had a name now, an identity. It should have made me feel better. Monsters are less frightening when named, but it didn't. It made him real. Police told me they were launching an official investigation. The crawl spaces behind the walls weren't even on the building's blueprints. It was clear someone had modified the architecture, likely over years. They pulled more tapes, some going back a decade. All different women, all living alone. Some had filed complaints about noises. Others had disappeared entirely. My stomach turned when I saw a folder labeled Sandra, Third Act. Third Act, like I was just a part in a script. I dropped out of school a week later. Couldn't focus, couldn't eat. Every creak, every flicker of movement made me jump. It wasn't just fear, it was violation. I'd been a character in someone else's obsession. Marcy begged me to see a therapist. I did once. But all the doctor said was, "You're lucky, most don't get away." That word, lucky, echoed in my head like a taunt, because I didn't feel lucky. I felt unfinished, like a story he hadn't finished writing. They found his real name, Detective Carnes told me, 3 weeks after I'd fled apartment 3B. Trevor Milton, former film student, dropped out of SUNY Purchase 8 years ago after a psychotic break. "Is he in custody?" I asked. "Not yet, but we're close. He has a pattern. He doesn't go far." They assigned me a protective detail, a plainclothes officer who followed me at a distance. I felt his eyes on me constantly. Another watcher, another intrusion. The irony wasn't lost on me. Then the letters started coming. Handwritten, no return address. Each one on faded script paper. Act 4, acceptance. Act 5, climax. Inside were notes. Stage directions, phrases like camera tight on fear, and victim realizes escape is futile. They weren't just letters. They were scripts, and I was still the lead. I changed numbers, deleted social media, moved in with my sister in Jersey, but it didn't stop. The protection detail apologized. They were watching me, not my mail. Each envelope passed their screening because they contained no explicit threats, just narrative. "He's playing with you," my sister said one night, watching me burn the latest letter in the sink. "He wants you scared." "I know," I whispered, watching the paper curl and blacken. "That's the whole point." My sister's apartment was modern, secure. Nothing like the crumbling pre-war building that housed 3B. But even there, I felt exposed. I taped over the webcams, checked under furniture for devices, and slept with the lights on. Another package arrived. This one had a single still photo. Me sleeping in Marcy's apartment. The angle was high, as if taken from inside a vent, scrawled on the back, "Still perfect." That night, I made a decision. I wouldn't run anymore. If he wanted a climax, I'd give him one. I started preparing. I read books on obsessive behavior, on surveillance, on how predators escalate, and I planned. Every day, I turned the fear into structure, a script of my own. One where I wouldn't be the victim, one where he wouldn't walk away. "You can't go back there," Detective Carnes argued when I told him my plan. "It's too dangerous. Let us handle this." "You've been handling it for 6 weeks," I replied. "He's still out there, still watching." "We're close, Sandra. We've got officers." "Outside, not inside the walls, not where he lives." Carnes leaned back in his chair, studying me. "What exactly are you proposing?" "I go back. I become bait." "Absolutely not. I'm not asking permission, Detective. I'm asking for backup." In the end, they agreed, reluctantly. They couldn't spare the manpower for round-the-clock surveillance inside the apartment, but they'd monitor from outside, ready to move in at the first sign of trouble. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than nothing. I went back to apartment 3B, re-rented it under a fake name using a friend's ID. The landlord never looked twice. I set up cameras of my own, real ones, monitored ones. I rearranged the furniture, added mirrors, booby-trapped vents with flour and glass shards. Then I waited. For Henry, for Trevor, for the monster in the walls. Because now I knew his pattern. I wasn't just Sandra anymore. I was the director. The first night back in apartment 3B was quiet. Too quiet. I kept every light on, my own cameras rolling from 5 angles. I pretended to sleep, fully clothed, knife taped under my mattress. I left the closet panel slightly ajar, just enough to tempt him. For 3 nights, nothing. Then on the 4th, at exactly 3:06 a.m., I heard it. A soft scrape behind the wall, followed by that familiar, wet breathing. He was there. I didn't move. I let my body stay limp like I was lost in sleep. I counted the seconds in my head. At 3:10, the whisper came. "Scene 1, he murmured, voice low and raspy. I felt my stomach twist, but I stayed still. I knew what he wanted, to watch me flinch, to record my terror. I wouldn't give it to him. I let him narrate to himself, a director losing grip on the script. Then I heard a click. A camera. He was filming. When I reviewed the footage later, I saw his fingers first, emerging from the slats in the closet, holding a small handheld camcorder. He stayed there, crouched behind the open panel, breathing, watching, and then retreating, like a rat too cautious to spring the trap. But I had what I needed. Proof. Timestamp. A clear frame of his pale hand, the veins bulging, a scar running down the middle finger. "It's not enough," Detective Karnes said the next day, reviewing the footage in the surveillance van parked down the street. "We need a clear ID, or him physically in your apartment." "He'll come in," I said. "He's escalating. The first 3 women he just watched. The next 2 he filmed. The last one, Claire, he approached." "And she disappeared," Karnes reminded me. "This isn't a game, Sandra." "It is to him, and I'm changing the rules." The next night I left the cameras running and played my part. Pajamas, lights off, lights on, moving through the apartment like I didn't know. But this time I left something new, a printed script page placed deliberately on the coffee table. At the top, Act 6, Finale. I knew he'd see it, knew he wouldn't be able to resist. I wrote a final scene. Victim surrenders, sits in bed waiting. Killer enters. Close up on knife under mattress. That night he came in. I saw it on the feed. He entered from the back of the closet, slow, deliberate, camera in one hand, long silver knife in the other. He whispered lines to himself as he crossed the room, humming something under his breath. Fade to black, close up on fear. He raised the knife over me. Just as I rolled out of bed, grabbed the flash powder I'd hidden in the nightstand and blinded him with a blast of light. He screamed, stumbled, dropped the knife. "No," he yelled, rubbing his eyes. "You ruined it." I didn't wait. I lunged, tackled him to the floor, grabbed the knife and drove it into his shoulder. Once, twice. He shrieked and thrashed like a child denied his toy. I hit the panic button. The cops were outside in less than 5 minutes. When they pulled him out of the building, he looked almost pathetic. Eyes glazed, teeth stained, muttering about reels and cuts and masterpieces. "She improvised," he kept saying. "She ruined my ending." The police found over 80 tapes in the walls, labeled meticulously. Carly at 06, Emily 2010, Claire 2017. Dozens more marked only with numbers or nicknames. Victims from previous apartments across years, even cities. Many matched missing persons reports. Some hadn't been reported at all. The detective said it was the worst case of long-term stalking they'd ever seen. Not just a killer, one told me. A collector, an editor. Trevor Milton had once been a film student at SUNY Purchase, dropped out after a breakdown. His professors described him as brilliant but unnerving. His thesis had been rejected for being disturbing, voyeuristic. After that, he disappeared, changed names, slipped through cracks, became a phantom in rental records. Apartment 3B had been his studio. I was to be his final reel. I sat through depositions, trials, victim panels. Every night I dreamed of vents and whispers and hands reaching from the dark. Sometimes I still do. Trevor pled insanity. The tapes proved premeditation, but the jury saw something broken in him, something incurable. He was sentenced to life in a psychiatric facility under maximum security. But even in court, he stared at me, not with hate, with disappointment. "You changed the ending," he told me during his testimony. "It was supposed to be beautiful." The media circus lasted for months. The director, they called him. The details were lurid enough to keep the story in the news cycle for weeks. The crawl spaces, the cameras, the scripts, the missing women. My name was kept out of the reports, but it didn't matter. Everyone in my program knew. Everyone in the building knew. I moved again, far away, changed my name, my major, my life. I turned down the book deals, the interviews, the Netflix documentary. I don't want to be part of Trevor's footage. I don't want to be edited into his narrative. I want to live, unwatched, unrecorded, unscripted. But sometimes, when I pass a mirror and see the faint outline of myself, blurry, out of focus, I wonder if somewhere, one of Trevor's copies survived. Maybe a tape hidden so deep the police missed it. Maybe someone's watching it now, in the dark, studying my fear. Maybe they're inspired, and maybe they've already picked their next character. 3 years after Trevor's conviction, I received a package. No return address, just my name, my new name, typed on a plain label. Inside was a USB drive and a handwritten note. Deleted scenes. I should have thrown it away. Should have called Detective Carnes, now Captain Carnes. But curiosity, the same fatal flaw that drives every horror movie protagonist into the basement, made me plug it in. The file was a single video, grainy, monochrome, a psychiatric hospital room, Trevor sitting on a bed looking directly at the camera. "Hello, Sandra," he said, his voice the same raspy whisper I heard through the walls. "Did you think it was over? The thing about great cinema is that there's always a sequel." I ejected the drive, hands shaking, and called Captain Carnes. He arrived within the hour, bagged the evidence, and promised to investigate. "It's probably nothing," he said, though his expression told me otherwise. "Some sicko fan who followed the case." "He knew my new name," I said. "My new address." Carnes nodded grimly. "We'll check on Trevor. Make sure he's still secured." Trevor was still locked up, still heavily medicated, still barely coherent. The facility's director assured Carnes that it was impossible for him to have created or sent the video. "Someone else then," I said, pacing my living room. "A copycat." "Or a collaborator," Carnes suggested. We always wondered if he had help with some of the technical aspects. The thought sent ice through my veins. Not just Trevor, but someone else. Someone still out there. Someone who knew where I was. I moved again after that. No forwarding address, no social media, no digital footprint. I became a ghost, the very thing I'd fought against becoming. The irony wasn't lost on me. But the truth is, once you've been watched, really watched, you never feel truly alone again. Your privacy becomes a fiction you tell yourself to sleep at night. Your solitude becomes a performance for an audience you can't see. Sometimes I think I hear crying through the walls of my new apartment. Sometimes I catch a shadow moving just at the edge of my vision. Sometimes I wake to find things slightly out of place. A book moved an inch, a chair angled differently. And sometimes in my darkest moments, I wonder if Trevor was right. If this was always going to be a sequel. If I'm still just a character in someone else's story. But then I remember that night in apartment 3B. I remember the look on his face when I fought back. I remember taking control of the narrative. And I know that whatever comes next, whoever might be watching, this is my story now. And I'm ready for the final cut. "3 weeks ago, I left for a work trip to Germany. My wife didn't want to come. 'I'll hang back,' she said. Water the plants, binge Netflix, watch the dog. She's 39. She's not helpless. I thought I could leave her alone. I thought wrong. The morning of my departure was ordinary in every way that matters. Karen kissed me goodbye at the door, her dark hair pulled into a messy bun, wearing the faded university sweatshirt she refused to throw away despite the fraying cuffs. Our retriever, Rusty, pressed his wet nose against my hand as if reminding me not to stay away too long. "I've left the schedule on the fridge," I said, hoisting my carry-on over my shoulder. "The dog food is in the pantry, top shelf," she finished, rolling her eyes. "I know, David. I've lived here for 12 years. I nodded, feeling that familiar pang of guilt that always accompanied business trips. 3 weeks was our longest separation since our honeymoon was cut short by food poisoning in Bali. Karen had joked then that her body rejected paradise. "It's fine," she said, reading my expression. "I've got my garden club meeting on Thursday, and Jessica wants to try that new Thai place downtown." She gestured vaguely toward the kitchen. "Plus, I've been reading about fermentation. Might finally try making that sourdough starter everyone was obsessed with during lockdown." I kissed her again, lingering a moment longer than necessary. "Just don't burn the house down." "That's rich coming from the man who set fire to a frozen pizza," she laughed, pushing me gently toward the door. "Go catch your plane." The Munich conference had been in the works for months. As lead systems architect for our firm, I couldn't pass up the opportunity to represent us at Europe's largest security summit. Karen understood. She always did. But something in her smile that morning seemed forced. Her therapist had adjusted her medication again last month, and these transitions were never easy. I texted her from the airport. "Boarding now. Love you." Her response came immediately. "Love you more. Bring me back chocolate and weird German mustard." The flight was uneventful. I spent most of it reviewing presentations and dozing fitfully against the window. When we landed, I sent Karen another text, but received no response. Time difference, I reasoned. She was probably asleep. My hotel room overlooked the Englischer Garten, Munich's sprawling central park. I unpacked methodically, arranging toiletries in the bathroom, hanging shirts to prevent wrinkles. The conference didn't start until the following morning, so I walked to a nearby restaurant for dinner, ordering in my rusty college German. Back in my room, I tried calling Karen. The phone rang 6 times before going to voicemail. I checked my watch, 2 p.m. in Minneapolis. She should be awake. I sent another text. Landed safely. Hotel is nice. Everything okay there? No response that night. I fell asleep watching German television, the unfamiliar language washing over me like static. The first missed check-in was small. I FaceTimed her on day 2. She was in the kitchen, sweaty, flour all over her face. She smiled wide, too wide, and said she was baking bread the old-fashioned way. It wasn't until later I realized she never used the oven. She thought Epsom salt was yeast. She laughed when the bread cracked the marble counter and called it cremezilla. She placed it on the counter like a relic. "Are you okay?" I asked, noting the dark circles under her eyes, the slight tremor in her hands. She blinked slowly. "Better," she said. "I'm cleansing." "Cleansing? Like a juice cleanse?" "Something like that." She tilted the phone, showing me mason jars lined up on the windowsill. They contained cloudy liquids in varying shades of amber and green. "I'm fermenting. Kimchi, sauerkraut, kombucha. Getting all the good bacteria." "That's great," I said, uncertainty creeping into my voice. Karen had never shown interest in fermentation before. Her culinary adventures typically ended with takeout menus. "How's Rusty?" As if on cue, I heard scratching from somewhere off camera. Karen's expression flickered, momentarily annoyed. "He's being weird. Keeps whining at the basement door." "We don't have a basement," I said. Karen laughed, the sound brittle. "Figure of speech. He's under the bed right now. Won't come out." That night, the dog crawled under the bed and refused to come out. I couldn't shake the unease that settled over me. I called my sister Jennifer, who lived across town. "Would you mind stopping by to check on Karen?" I asked. "She seems off." "Off how?" I hesitated. "Just not herself. Probably nothing." Jennifer agreed to visit the next day. Her message came through while I was in a panel discussion on quantum encryption. "Stop by." Karen wasn't home, but I left the casserole we talked about in the fridge. Everything looked normal. Dog seemed fine, maybe a little skittish. I frowned at my phone. Karen hadn't mentioned plans to go out. When I texted her asking where she'd been, her response was delayed by several hours. Farmer's market, getting supplies. Attached was a photo of produce: cabbage, carrots, beets, and other vegetables I couldn't immediately identify. The quantities seemed excessive for one person. In the background, I could make out a cluster of glass jars and crocks on our kitchen counter that I didn't recognize. "What's with all the jars?" I texted back. "For fermentation. The microbes need homes. The microbes need homes." Something about that phrasing sent a chill through me, though I couldn't articulate why. I told myself I was overreacting. Karen was exploring a new hobby, that's all. It was probably good for her to have a project while I was away. I tried to focus on the conference, networking with colleagues, attending workshops. But as the days passed, my unease grew. Karen's texts became increasingly erratic, arriving at odd hours, filled with strange non sequiturs and references to her colonies and cultures. By day 5, when I called before bed, she answered wearing a white bathrobe I'd never seen before. Her hair hung in limp strands around her face, and her skin had a waxy pallor that the poor video quality couldn't disguise. "I think I need to call Dr. Matthews," I said, referring to her psychiatrist. "This doesn't seem like the right medication balance." "I stopped taking those," she said, her voice distant. "They were killing my microbiome." "Karen, you can't just stop." "The microbes know what I need." She leaned closer to the camera, her eyes feverishly bright. "I can hear them now, David. They're singing." The call ended abruptly. When I tried to call back, it went straight to voicemail. I barely slept that night, torn between worry for my wife and responsibilities at the conference. The next morning, I contacted Dr. Matthews' office, leaving an urgent message about Karen's behavior. The receptionist called back while I was in a meeting. "Dr. Matthews can't discuss another patient with you without consent," she explained. "But he strongly recommends that patients don't discontinue their medication without supervision. Could you ask him to call her? I'm worried." "We've been trying. She's not answering our calls." I ended the conference call early, my heart pounding with worry. When I finally reached Karen, she was in the garden, the phone propped against something as she dug in the soil with bare hands. "What are you planting?" I asked, forcing lightness into my tone. "Not planting," she corrected, holding up a handful of dark earth. "Harvesting. The soil is full of beneficial organisms." She brought the dirt to her mouth and, before I could protest, licked it from her palm. "Jesus, Karen, don't eat dirt." She looked at me with pity. "It's not dirt, David. It's life." The dog appeared briefly in the frame, lingering at the edge of the garden. His fur looked matted, and he kept his distance from Karen, watching her with wary eyes. "Is Rusty eating?" I asked. "He doesn't look good." "He doesn't understand yet," Karen said, turning back to her digging. "But he will. We all will." I ended the call feeling sick with worry. Something was seriously wrong with my wife, and I was 5,000 miles away, powerless to help. I called Jennifer again, more insistent this time. "I need you to go check on her now." "I was just there 2 days ago," Jennifer protested. She seemed fine, a little intense about her new hobby, but... "Please," I interrupted. "I think she might be having some kind of breakdown." Jennifer agreed reluctantly. Her message came 3 hours later. She wouldn't let me in the house, said she was in the middle of an important fermentation phase and couldn't risk contamination. Talked to her through the door. She sounds weird but coherent. What do you want me to do? What could I do? Force my sister to break into my house? Call the police for a wellness check because my wife was fermenting vegetables and acting strangely? It wasn't illegal to be eccentric. I resolved to cut my trip short. The essential presentations were done. I could miss the final days of networking. I called the airline and rebooked my flight for 3 days later, the earliest available return. That night, I dreamt of Karen standing in our kitchen, surrounded by bubbling jars, their contents alive and writhing. In the dream, she opened her mouth to speak, but instead of words, a swarm of tiny wriggling things poured forth, covering everything in a living blanket. I woke gasping, drenched in sweat. My phone showed a new text from Karen, sent at 3:17 a.m. Munich time. The microbes are singing again. Attached was a photo of a jar filled with orange liquid, carrot juice presumably, the surface covered with a thin white film that seemed to pulse in the harsh kitchen light. By week 2, the texts got stranger. She sent me a photo of a jar of carrot juice with the caption, "The microbes are singing again." She told me she'd gone raw vegan, juicing exclusively, 19 pounds of produce, half rotted. She juiced it all anyway. She stopped eating solids. The dog stopped eating too. And I swear, though I still don't know how, our fish changed color. He used to be orange. Now he's almost translucent, like he's been bleached by something unseen. The microbes are singing again. The text arrived at 4:23 a.m. local time, waking me from fitful sleep. I stared at the attached image, trying to make sense of the cloudy orange liquid with its film of white. Was that normal for fermented carrot juice? I had no frame of reference. "What do they sing about?" I texted back, humoring her. The response came immediately, as if she'd been waiting. Transformation. They sing about becoming. A chill ran through me despite the warm Munich morning. I called her, but the line rang endlessly without answer. When I tried FaceTime, she declined the call, sending another text instead. "Can't talk. Juicing." I forced myself through the motions of the conference day, smiling mechanically through presentations, taking notes I'd never review. During lunch, I stepped outside to call our neighbor, Michael, an affable retiree who sometimes collected our mail when we traveled. "I haven't seen much of Karen," he admitted after I explained my concerns. "The curtains have been drawn for days. But I did notice something odd yesterday. She was in your backyard at dawn, digging in the garden plot wearing what looked like a bathrobe. When I waved, she just stared at me, then went back inside. Would you mind knocking on the door, just to check?" He agreed, calling back 20 minutes later. No answer, but I heard movement inside. "And David..." He hesitated. "Your dog was at the window. He was barking, but it sounded strange, almost like he was trying to talk." I thanked him, fighting rising panic. My flight home wasn't for another 4 days. I considered booking an even earlier return, regardless of cost. But the next available seat wasn't until tomorrow evening, a negligible improvement. That afternoon, during a break in the proceedings, I finally got through to Karen on FaceTime. The camera showed our kitchen ceiling for several seconds before her face appeared, gaunt and pale. The white robe hung loosely from her shoulders, already showing signs of discoloration. "You've lost weight," I said, noting her hollowed cheeks. "Purification," she replied, her voice hoarse. "I've gone raw vegan, juicing exclusively." Behind her, I could see our kitchen counters covered with produce in various states of decomposition. Some fruits were black with rot, vegetables slumped in their own liquefied remains. "Karen, that doesn't look safe to eat." She picked up what might once have been a zucchini, now a soft, putrid mass. "The microbes are strongest in the transition phase. 19 pounds of produce today." She smiled, revealing teeth stained with vegetable pulp. "Half rotted. I juiced it all anyway." My stomach turned. "Where's Rusty? Is he okay?" Her expression soured. "He refuses to evolve. Won't eat what I give him." "He's a dog, Karen. He needs dog food, not whatever this is." "Everything needs to transform," she said, moving the camera to show a row of mason jars filled with murky liquids in various stages of fermentation. Some had cloth covers secured with rubber bands, Others were sealed with airlocks that bubbled ominously. "And the fish?" I asked, remembering the small betta fish in the bowl on her desk, a Valentine's Day gift from 3 years ago. She swiveled the camera toward the fishbowl. I squinted, disbelieving what I saw. The once vibrant orange betta was now almost transparent, its internal organs visible through tissue-thin scales. It floated listlessly near the surface, fins ragged. "He's changing too," Karen whispered reverently. "Though I still don't know how. He used to be orange. Now he's almost translucent, like he's been bleached by something unseen." "That fish is dying," I said flatly. "What did you put in his water?" "Nothing," she insisted. "He's just becoming." The call ended abruptly again. When I tried to call back, she didn't answer. Instead, she sent a series of photos: her breakfast, a mason jar filled with cloudy brown liquid, the garden where she dug several small inexplicable holes, the laundry room where garments soaked in buckets of discolored water. "What are you soaking in those buckets?" I texted. "Culture," came the cryptic response. That evening I contacted Dr. Matthews again, more insistent this time. After explaining the situation, he agreed to try reaching Karen. "If she's experiencing a manic episode or psychosis, she needs immediate intervention," he said. "If I can't reach her by tomorrow, I recommend calling emergency services for a wellness check." I thanked him, then spent an hour researching psychiatric holds and involuntary commitment in Minnesota. The criteria were stringent: immediate danger to self or others. Was fermenting rotten vegetables and talking about microbes singing evidence of immediate danger? I wasn't sure. The next morning, Dr. Matthews called back. "I spoke with Karen," he said, his tone measured. "She's definitely exhibiting concerning behaviors, but she was lucid enough during our conversation that I can't recommend emergency intervention at this time. She's agreed to come in for an appointment next week." "Next week might be too late," I argued. "Without clear evidence that she's a danger to herself or others, our options are limited," he explained patiently. "The best course is for you to return home as soon as possible." I hung up, frustrated by the constraints of a system designed to protect patient autonomy, even when that autonomy might be compromised by the very illness needing treatment. In the afternoon, Karen sent me a video. She stood in our bathroom, the white robe now distinctly beige, recording herself in the mirror. Her hair hung in damp clumps, and her skin had a strange sheen, as if coated in something oily. "I've been bathing in kombucha," she announced, pride evident in her voice. "The SCOBY is integrating with my skin microbiome. Can you see?" She moved closer to the mirror, showing patches on her neck and collarbones that looked raw and inflamed. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" SCOBY, symbiotic culture of bacteria and yeast, the rubbery pancake-like mass that forms on fermenting kombucha. I'd seen them in health food stores floating in jars like alien specimens. The thought of my wife bathing in that substance made me physically ill. "Karen, please stop. You're hurting yourself," I pleaded. "That looks like a serious skin infection." "It's not infection, it's connection," she insisted. "I've never felt so alive." Behind her, movement caught my eye. Rusty, slinking along the hallway, keeping close to the wall. He looked thinner, his coat dull. When Karen turned toward him, he bolted, disappearing from frame. "The dog stopped eating too," she said, turning back to the camera. "He'll understand soon. We're becoming something better." That night, I barely slept. I packed my things, ready for my flight the next evening. I sent desperate texts to Karen throughout the day, receiving only cryptic responses or no answer at all. At noon, she called me. Instead of video, it was just her voice, distant and echoing as if she were speaking from the bottom of a well. "I had a breakthrough," she whispered. "The kombucha spoke to me." "Kombucha doesn't speak," I said, keeping my voice level. "Karen, I think you might be hallucinating. This isn't healthy." "Not with words," she continued as if I hadn't spoken. "With feelings, with purpose. It wants to spread, David. It wants to grow, and it chose me. I'm coming home tomorrow. I said firmly. We'll figure this out together. Yes, she agreed, suddenly sounding more like her old self. Come home. I have so much to show you, so much to share. Something in her tone sent ice through my veins, eagerness, but not for reunion. Anticipation of something else entirely. Where's Rusty now? I asked, changing the subject. A pause. Hiding, she finally said, irritation creeping into her voice. He'll come around. They all will. And the fish? Evolving, she said, her voice dropping to a reverent whisper. You won't believe how beautiful he's becoming. After we hung up, I texted Jennifer again. Please go check on the house one more time. I'm worried about the dog. Her response came hours later. Went by after work. Karen let me in this time. Place smells weird, like vinegar and kombucha on steroids. She looks thin, but insisted she's fine. Dog came when I called him, seemed scared but physically okay. She's got jars of stuff everywhere, David. And she was wearing this gross bathrobe that looks like it's molding. I tried to talk to her about seeing her doctor, but she just kept offering me kombucha. I'm worried too. I thanked her for checking, then spent my final night in Munich packing and preparing for whatever awaited me at home. Before bed, I received one last text from Karen, a photo of her hand holding something small and squirming. Making friends, read the caption. They're ready to meet you. I zoomed in on the image, trying to identify what she was holding. It looked like a pale, writhing worm or larva, but larger than any mealworm I'd seen. Had she started composting too? Or was she harvesting insects from the garden? Sleep eluded me that night. When I finally drifted off near dawn, I dreamed of Karen standing in our kitchen, surrounded by bubbling jars. In the dream, she opened one and drank deeply, then turned to me with a smile that split her face too wide, revealing not teeth but countless tiny wriggling things. I woke up, gasping, drenched in sweat. On my phone was a final message from Karen, sent while I slept. Safe travels. We're also excited for you to join us. The robe appeared in every FaceTime. At first it was white, later beige, then brown. By the last call it had blotches, like it was rotting or growing. She didn't notice, or she did and didn't care. She had a scarf in her lap, something she'd begun to knit with frantic, uneven stitching. It's helping me ground the parasites, she said. I thought she was joking, until I saw the jar next to her. There were pickles in it and something else, something twitching. The flight from Munich to Minneapolis stretched interminably. Every bump of turbulence, every announcement from the cockpit seemed designed to fray my already tattered nerves. I checked my phone compulsively during the Amsterdam layover, but Karen had gone silent. No new messages, no responses to my texts. Jennifer sent an update. Drove by this morning. Curtains still drawn, no sign of activity. Left a voicemail for Dr. Matthews. I stared out the airplane window as we began our descent into Minneapolis, watching familiar landmarks emerge through breaks in the cloud cover. The Mississippi River cutting through the city, the gleaming towers of downtown, the sprawling suburbs where our house waited, where Karen waited, transformed into someone I no longer recognized. The customs line crawled at a glacial pace. I shifted my weight from foot to foot, checking my watch every 30 seconds. When I finally reached the front, the agent barely glanced at my passport before waving me through. The universe granting me one small mercy. I retrieved my car from long-term parking and drove home through the gathering dusk, rehearsing what I would say to Karen, how I would convince her to seek help, whether I should call for medical assistance immediately or try to assess the situation first. Our neighborhood looked unchanged, the same manicured lawns, the same tasteful landscaping, the same sense of middle-class security that had attracted us to this suburb in the first place. Mrs. Gunderson walked her poodle down the sidewalk. The Anderson kids played basketball in their driveway. Normal life continuing all around while mine had veered into unfamiliar territory. I turned onto our street, heart hammering against my ribs. From the outside, our house looked ordinary. A 2-story colonial with blue shutters and a wraparound porch. No obvious signs of the strangeness unfolding within. The garden, visible from the street, showed evidence of Karen's digging. Irregular holes dotting the once neat vegetable beds, plants uprooted and left to wither. I parked in the driveway and sat for a moment, gathering courage. Then I grabbed my suitcase from the trunk and approached the front door, key in hand. When I landed, I knew something was wrong the moment I walked in. The house smelled like fermented soil, like vinegar and dying herbs, like decay pretending to be health. The stench hit me like a physical force, sour and pungent with undertones of something rotten. I gagged, covering my nose with my sleeve. The entryway was dark, curtains drawn against the evening light. I fumbled for the switch, but nothing happened when I flipped it. "Karen?" I called, my voice echoing in the stillness. A rustling sound came from the kitchen, followed by soft footsteps. I moved forward cautiously, phone in hand, thumb hovering over the emergency call button. She ran to greet me, robe flapping, eyes wild. She didn't blink, just pressed a jar of kombucha into my hand and whispered, "Drink me." Karen emerged from the shadows, arms outstretched. The robe I'd seen in our video calls hung from her emaciated frame, once white, now a mottled brown with darker patches that glistened in the dim light. Her hair hung in limp strands, sections missing as if torn out or fallen away. But most disturbing was her face, gaunt and pale with a sheen that caught what little light filtered through the curtains. Her eyes were fever bright, pupils dilated. "You're home," she breathed, her voice raspy as if from disuse. Finally. I stood frozen, unable to reconcile this apparition with my wife of 12 years, the woman who sang off-key in the shower and alphabetized her spice rack, the woman who cried at dog food commercials and refused to kill spiders, trapping them under glasses to release outside. "Karen," I managed, "what's happened to you?" She smiled, revealing teeth stained brown. "Evolution," she said simply. Then she thrust a mason jar into my hands, filled with amber liquid and topped with a thick gelatinous disc. "Drink me." I set the jar on the entryway table, fighting revulsion. "I think we need to get you to a hospital." Her smile faltered. "You don't understand yet, but you will." She grabbed my wrist with surprising strength, her fingers clammy against my skin. "I've prepared everything. The transformation is beautiful, David. Beautiful and necessary." I gently extricated myself from her grip. "Where's Rusty?" As if in answer, a whine came from upstairs, followed by the click of nails on hardwood. The dog appeared at the top of the stairs, hesitating, trembling visibly even from a distance. The dog wouldn't come near her. He pressed himself against my leg, trembling, eyes wide. He kept glancing at the fish tank. I looked too. When Rusty saw me, he bounded down the stairs, nearly tumbling in his haste. He pressed against my legs, whimpering, his entire body quivering with what could only be described as relief. I knelt to examine him, running my hands over his ribs, too prominent, and his dull coat. He licked my face frantically, as if confirming I was real. "He hasn't been eating," Karen said, watching our reunion with detached interest. "He doesn't understand the gift I'm offering." "What gift, Karen? What are you talking about?" Instead of answering, she turned and walked toward the living room, the robe trailing behind her, leaving a faint smear on the hardwood floor. I followed reluctantly, Rusty pressed against my side. Our living room had been transformed, furniture pushed to the walls, the center of the room dominated by what looked like an altar of fermenting vessels, mason jars, crocks, buckets, all bubbling and alive with whatever cultures Karen had cultivated. The air was thick with that sour rot smell, stronger here, almost overwhelming. Karen gestured proudly at her collection. 3 weeks, she said. It took 3 weeks to achieve this level of symbiosis. I moved closer, examining the vessels. Most contained recognizable ferments, kombucha, sauerkraut, kimchi, though darker and more active than any I'd seen in stores. Others held substances I couldn't identify. Black, viscous liquids, pale, trembling masses, cloudy brines with things floating in them, moving in a way that seemed deliberate. My gaze landed on Karen's desk in the corner, where the fish tank stood illuminated by the desk lamp, the only light in the room. I approached it slowly, dreading what I might find. The fish had buried himself under the gravel, completely still. I tapped the glass gently, but there was no response. "Neptune's just sleeping," Karen said, coming to stand beside me. "He's been through a lot. The changes are taxing." I stared into the murky water, trying to make out the fish's form beneath the gravel. "What did you do to him?" "I shared," she said simply. "Just a few drops at first, then more." She pointed to a mason jar on her desk, filled with a cloudy liquid. "The mother culture, the original." I backed away from her, bile rising in my throat. "You put that in his water? Karen, that's animal cruelty." Her expression hardened. "It's evolution, accelerated, directed." She moved to the center of the room, touching jars almost tenderly. "These aren't just ferments, David. They're new life forms, symbiotic relationships that have never existed before." I glanced around the room, noting other disturbing details I'd missed initially. The walls were stained with splashes of various colors, as if something had exploded or been flung against them. The carpet was discolored in patches, some areas appearing dissolved, and on the coffee table, partially covered by a cloth, was a jar larger than the others, its contents obscured. Karen followed my gaze and smiled. She crossed to the coffee table and removed the cloth with a flourish. My masterpiece. The jar contained what looked like pickles floating in brine, but among them were pale, elongated things that writhed and twisted. They resembled larvae or small eels, moving with purpose through the cloudy liquid. "What the hell are those?" I demanded, taking an involuntary step back. "Parasites," she said proudly. "From the garden, I cultivated them, modified them with the mother culture." She picked up a half-finished scarf from the couch, the one I'd seen in our FaceTime calls with its uneven, frantic stitching. "This helps me ground them, channel their energy." I thought she was joking until I saw the jar next to her. There were pickles in it, and something else, something twitching. "You need help, Karen," I said firmly. "This isn't healthy. This isn't sane." Her smile vanished. "You sound like Dr. Matthews, closed-minded, limited." She clutched the scarf to her chest. "I'm not sick, David. I'm evolving, becoming something more than human." Rusty growled low in his throat, still pressed against my leg. His eyes were fixed on the jar of writhing things, hackles raised. I needed to get out, to call for help. But I couldn't leave Karen like this, couldn't abandon her to whatever delusion had consumed her. "Let me make you something to eat," I suggested, desperate to establish some normalcy. "Real food. Then we can talk about next steps." "I don't eat solids anymore," she said, picking up the jar of kombucha she'd offered earlier. "Just this. The cultures provide everything I need." I noticed then the extent of her transformation, not just the weight loss and strange skin, but subtle changes in her posture, her movements. She held herself differently, moved with an almost fluid quality, as if her joints worked in new ways. And there was a smell coming from her, distinct from the general fermentation odor of the house, sharper, more pungent, like vinegar and something else, something organic and wrong. "At least let me open some windows," I pleaded. "Get some fresh air in here." She hesitated, then nodded. "Just for a few minutes. Too much fresh air disrupts the cultures." I moved through the house, opening windows, turning on fans, desperate to disperse the miasma of fermentation. Rusty followed me everywhere, refusing to let me out of his sight. In the kitchen, I found more evidence of Karen's descent. Counters covered with rotting produce, sink filled with murky water, refrigerator humming but unplugged, its contents presumably spoiled. When I returned to the living room, Karen was sitting cross-legged on the floor, the jar of parasites in her lap, stroking the glass as one might pet a cat. "How did this start?" I asked, keeping my distance. Why fermentation? She looked up, her expression serene. I told you I was going to try making sourdough, remember? But then I found an article about wild fermentation, about capturing wild yeasts and bacteria. Her eyes took on that feverish gleam again. I started with flour and water. Simple. But it didn't work. Nothing happened. So I added things. Vegetables from the garden, soil samples, water from the pond in the park. She lifted the jar, watching the creatures inside twist and turn. Then I found these in the garden, parasites living in the soil. I added them to the culture and everything changed. They transformed the ferment, and the ferment transformed them. She lowered her voice to a whisper, and then they started talking to me. I swallowed hard, fighting the urge to grab her and drag her bodily to the hospital. What did they say? That humans are limited, incomplete, that we could be so much more if we embraced symbiosis. She set down the jar and stood, the robe falling open slightly to reveal skin mottled with the same brown patches as the garment. I've been integrating with them, David, becoming something new. I backed toward the door, fumbling for my phone. I'm calling Dr. Matthews. Karen's expression darkened. No, you need to understand first. She advanced on me, movements eerily fluid. You need to join us. Us? I echoed, thumb finally finding the emergency call button. The collective, she said, gesturing around the room. All of us. The cultures, the parasites, me. Soon you. And Rusty, if he stops fighting it. She smiled, that too wide smile I'd seen on our first FaceTime call, now revealing teeth that seemed slightly translucent at the edges. We're going to change everything, David. Starting with this house, then the neighborhood, then the world. She lunged suddenly, knocking the phone from my hand. I scrambled to retrieve it, but she was faster, eerily so, snatching it and throwing it into one of the buckets of fermenting liquid. You'll thank me, she whispered, her face inches from mine. Once you've tasted the mother culture, once you've begun to transform. Rusty barked sharply, placing himself between us, teeth bared at the woman who had once been his beloved owner. I took advantage of the distraction to back toward the door. I'm going to get help, Karen. Real help. You can't leave, she said, her voice suddenly multi-toned as if multiple throats were speaking through hers. The transformation has already begun. The spores are in the air, in your lungs, on your skin. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air coming through the open windows. Was she right? Had I already been exposed to whatever had changed her? I glanced down at my hands, half expecting to see them transforming before my eyes. That night I barely slept, I whispered, remembering the last part of my nightmare. I woke up to her in bed, burping softly in her sleep, repeating over and over, I think I'm a kombucha now. I think I'm a kombucha now. I think I'm... She never finished the sentence, just smiled. Karen tilted her head, listening. Yes, she said. That's exactly what's happening. I'm becoming kombucha. Becoming the culture. And soon you will too. I backed into the entryway, groping blindly for the doorknob. I'm getting help, I repeated firmly. Stay here. Don't do anything else until I get back. Her smile widened impossibly, stretching her face in ways that human muscles shouldn't allow. We'll be waiting, she promised. All of us. I turned and fled, Rusty at my heels. This morning, the dog dragged his bed into the bathroom and closed the door with his paw. I didn't know dogs could do that. I swear I saw him lock it. The fish was upside down when I checked, but when I tapped the tank, he snapped upright and pressed his face to the glass. I swear he mouthed something. I couldn't hear it, but I felt it in my chest. Run. I spent the night at a motel 6 miles from our house, a dingy room that smelled of cigarettes and cheap cleaner. Rusty huddled on the bed beside me, still trembling occasionally, refusing to be more than inches away. I called Dr. Matthews' emergency line and left a detailed message describing Karen's condition. Then I called Jennifer. Jesus, David, she breathed after I'd recounted my homecoming. I knew something was off, but this sounds like full psychosis. I think it's worse than that, I said, surprised by my own words. This doesn't feel like any mental illness I've heard of. It's like she's actually changing. Changing how? Physically? I struggled to articulate what I'd seen. Her skin, her movements, the way she speaks sometimes like it's not just her voice. And that robe, I swear it's not just stained, Jennifer. It's like it's growing, becoming part of her. That's not possible, she said firmly. Whatever's happening, it's a psychiatric emergency, not a science fiction movie. You haven't seen her, I insisted. This is beyond delusion. Something is physically wrong. After we hung up, I sat on the edge of the bed, head in my hands. Was I losing my mind too? Rusty nudged my arm with his nose, whining softly. At least I had one witness to the horror unfolding in our home. I slept fitfully, waking every hour to check that Rusty was still beside me, that the door was still locked. When morning came, I felt no more rested than when I'd lain down. My phone showed missed calls from Dr. Matthews and Jennifer, but none from Karen. I returned the psychiatrist's call first. He listened to my account without interruption, then spoke carefully. What you're describing sounds like a severe psychotic break, possibly exacerbated by nutritional deficiency, if she's been consuming fermented foods exclusively. The physical changes you perceived may be a combination of weight loss, skin irritation from the kombucha, and your own stress response. She put something in the fish tank, I said. The fish changed color. Fish can change color due to stress or illness, he replied evenly. David, I understand how frightening this is, but we need to focus on getting Karen the help she needs. I've spoken with the psychiatric emergency team at Hennepin County Medical Center. They're prepared to dispatch a mobile crisis unit to your home for an evaluation. I gave him the address, then hung up, unconvinced. Dr. Matthews hadn't seen what I'd seen, hadn't smelled that house, hadn't witnessed Karen's impossible smile, or the things writhing in that jar. After walking Rusty around the motel parking lot, I drove to a nearby diner for breakfast. The dog refused to stay in the car, so I tied him to a bike rack near the entrance where I could see him through the window. He sat at attention, eyes fixed on me, still unwilling to let me out of his sight. Over greasy eggs and tasteless coffee, I tried to make sense of what was happening. Karen had always been interested in health trends. She'd gone through phases of juicing, intermittent fasting, paleo. But this fermentation obsession had appeared suddenly, while I was away, and it had progressed with unnatural speed from sourdough starter to whatever was happening now. My phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer. Crisis team went to your house. No answer at door. Police did welfare check, said Karen answered. Appeared eccentric, but not in immediate danger. They couldn't enter without more evidence of danger. I'm so sorry. I wasn't surprised. Karen had always been good at appearing normal when necessary, at masking whatever was happening beneath the surface. It was how she'd managed her depression for years, putting on a smile for the world while falling apart in private. After breakfast, I drove back to our neighborhood, parking a block away from our house. I didn't have a plan exactly, just a need to observe, to gather more information before deciding what to do next. From this distance, the house looked ordinary. A delivery truck dropped off a package at the door. The mail carrier made his rounds. No sign of Karen through the windows. I turned to Rusty in the passenger seat. What do you think, boy? Should we go back in there? His ears flattened against his head, a low whine escaping his throat. Yeah, that's what I thought. I drove to a pet store and bought food, water bowls, a leash, and treats for Rusty. Then I checked us into a different motel, farther from home but cleaner, with a small kitchenette where I could prepare simple meals. I needed time to think, to plan, to figure out how to save my wife from whatever was happening to her. That afternoon, Dr. Matthews called again. The crisis team couldn't make contact, he said, frustration evident in his voice. Without clear evidence that she's a danger to herself or others, they can't force entry. What about her appearance, the state of the house? They didn't get inside, David, and eccentric behavior alone isn't grounds for involuntary commitment. He paused. Our best option now is to try again when you're present. Your testimony as her husband, combined with a visual assessment by medical professionals, might be enough to initiate a 72-hour hold. I agreed to meet the crisis team at our house the following morning. After hanging up, I took Rusty for a long walk, trying to clear my head. The dog was still on high alert, startling at sudden noises, watching shadows warily. That night, I dreamed of Karen again. In the dream, she stood in our kitchen, her body translucent like the fish, organs and bones visible beneath her skin. But they weren't human organs anymore. They pulsed and shifted, rearranging themselves into new configurations. She opened her mouth to speak, and a cloud of spores billowed forth, filling the air, filling my lungs. I woke gasping, drenched in sweat. Rusty was already awake, standing rigid beside the bed, staring at the motel room door. A low growl rumbled in his chest. "What is it, boy?" I whispered, sitting up slowly. The growl deepened. I reached for the bedside lamp, but before I could turn it on, I heard it. A soft scratching at the door, so faint I might have imagined it. Then a whisper, barely audible. "David, let me in. I want to show you something." Karen's voice, but wrong somehow, vibrating at a frequency that made my teeth ache. I froze, heart hammering in my chest. How had she found us? I'd paid for the room in cash, hadn't used my credit card or phone in any way that could be traced. "I can smell you," the voice continued, as if reading my thoughts. "Both of you. The dog is fighting it, but you've already begun to change." Rusty's growl turned to a whimper. He backed away from the door, retreating to the bathroom. I remained motionless, barely breathing, hoping that if I stayed silent long enough, she would leave. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Finally, I heard footsteps moving away from the door, fading into the night. When morning came, I peered cautiously through the curtains before opening the door. The parking lot was empty except for a few cars. No sign of Karen. I walked Rusty quickly, then packed our meager belongings and checked out. We couldn't stay here. Not if she could find us so easily. I drove to a different part of town and parked in a shopping center lot, trying to decide what to do. The meeting with the crisis team was scheduled for 10 a.m., less than 2 hours away. But after last night, I was terrified to return to that house. My phone rang. "Jennifer." "Have you seen the news?" she asked without preamble. "No, why?" "There's something weird happening in your neighborhood. Some kind of gas leak or environmental thing. Several people have reported feeling sick, having strange dreams. The EPA is involved." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What kind of symptoms?" "Dizziness, hallucinations, skin irritation. One report mentioned hearing voices in the walls, and David, you don't think—" "I don't know," I said honestly. "But I'm supposed to meet the crisis team at the house in 2 hours." "Be careful," she urged. "Maybe wait for them outside, don't go in alone." After hanging up, I checked local news sites on my phone. The reports were vague: an environmental incident in our neighborhood, authorities investigating, residents experiencing unexplained symptoms. No evacuation order yet, but people were advised to report any unusual odors or health issues. I drove toward home with growing dread, Rusty once again pressed against my side. As we neared our street, I noticed emergency vehicles, police cars, an ambulance, what looked like hazmat suits moving in and out of a house 3 doors down from ours. I parked a block away and approached on foot, Rusty's leash gripped tightly in my hand. A police officer stopped me at the makeshift barrier they'd erected. "Sorry, sir, this area is restricted right now." I explained that I lived in the neighborhood, that I was meeting medical professionals to check on my wife. The officer radioed someone, then nodded. "You can go through, but stay on this side of the street. The incident is focused on those houses." He pointed to the section that included our neighbors, but not, curiously, our house. I walked slowly toward the commotion, scanning for the crisis team. A woman in a dark pantsuit approached, badge visible. "David? I'm Dr. Reed from the County Crisis Response Unit. Dr. Matthews briefed me about your wife." I shook her hand, noting two colleagues waiting nearby. "What's happening here?" I asked, gesturing toward the emergency response. "Some kind of environmental exposure," she said. "They're still investigating the source. Several residents reported symptoms over the past 48 hours. My wife has been exhibiting strange behaviors," I said carefully. "Talking about fermentation, microbes communicating with her. Could this be related?" Dr. Reed exchanged glances with her colleagues. "It's possible. Has your wife been experimenting with any unusual substances? Chemicals? Biologicals?" "Just fermentation," I said. "Kombucha, sauerkraut. But it's gone beyond normal fermentation. She's creating things, and she's changing physically." "Let's take a look," Dr. Reed said, gesturing toward our house. "But given the situation, we should be cautious. Do you have protective masks in your car? Even basic ones would be better than nothing." I retrieved disposable masks from my emergency kit, and we approached the house together, Rusty trailing reluctantly behind us. The front door was unlocked. I pushed it open slowly, calling out, "Karen, it's David. I've brought some doctors to talk with you." No response. The house was eerily silent, the miasma of fermentation even stronger than before. Dr. Reed and her colleagues visibly recoiled despite their masks. "That smell," one of them murmured. "Is that normal for fermentation?" "No," I said. "Not like this." We moved cautiously through the entryway into the living room. The altar of fermenting vessels remained, but something had changed. The jars were connected now by thin, translucent tubes, like medical IV lines, creating a network of circulating fluids. The largest jar, the one with the parasites, sat at the center, its contents more active than before. "Karen?" I called again, louder this time. Rusty whined, pulling at his leash, trying to retreat. I held firm, not wanting to be separated from him. Dr. Reed approached the fermenting setup, peering closely at the jars without touching them. "This is unusual," she said, clinical detachment in her voice. "These don't look like standard fermentation vessels." I moved toward Karen's desk, checking the fish tank. The water was clearer now, the gravel undisturbed. Neptune floated near the surface, completely motionless. This morning, the dog dragged his bed into the bathroom and closed the door with his paw. I didn't know dogs could do that. I swear I saw him lock it. "He's dead," I murmured, tapping the glass gently. To my horror, the fish suddenly flipped upright, darting to the front of the tank. He pressed himself against the glass, mouth opening and closing rapidly. And though I knew it was impossible, I would swear on my life that he was trying to form words. The fish was upside down when I checked, but when I tapped the tank, he snapped upright and pressed his face to the glass. I swear he mouthed something. I couldn't hear it, but I felt it in my chest. "Run." "We need to leave," I said, backing away from the tank. "Now." Dr. Reed turned to me, concern etched on her face. "We haven't found your wife yet. We should check upstairs." "No," I insisted, tugging Rusty toward the door. "Something's wrong. We need to get out." As if in response to my words, a low hum began to emanate from the fermenting vessels. The liquid inside them bubbled more vigorously, the tubes connecting them pulsing like veins. One of Dr. Reed's colleagues stepped forward. "What's activating them?" "I don't know," I said, panic rising in my throat. "Please, let's just go." The humming grew louder, vibrating through the floorboards. Rusty barked frantically, pulling harder at his leash. Even the crisis team began to look uneasy. "Maybe we should," Dr. Reed began, but was cut off by a voice from the top of the stairs. "You came back," Karen said, her voice carrying that strange, multi-toned quality I'd heard before. "And you brought friends." She descended slowly, the robe now almost black, clinging to her frame like a second skin, Her face was gaunt beyond recognition, eyes sunken but fever bright. Patches of her scalp were visible where hair had fallen away, and her skin had a strange texture, almost scaly in places. Dr. Reed stepped forward professionally. "Mrs. Miller, I'm Dr. Reed from County Mental Health Services. We'd like to talk with you about how you're feeling." Karen reached the bottom of the stairs, head tilted curiously. "I feel integrated, evolved." She smiled that impossible smile. "Would you like to evolve too?" One of the other team members whispered something to Dr. Reed, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "Karen," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "these people can help you. You're sick." "Not sick," she corrected. "Transforming. And it's spreading, David. The neighbors are joining us. Soon the whole street will be connected to the mother culture." She gestured to the network of fermenting vessels. "Isn't it beautiful?" Dr. Reed maintained her professional demeanor. "Mrs. Miller, we're concerned about your physical health. You appear to have lost a significant amount of weight, and your skin shows signs of a serious reaction to something." "Adaptation," Karen said dismissively. "The old tissues must be shed for the new to emerge." She moved toward the center jar, placing her hand on it lovingly. "The parasites showed me the way. They're ancient, waiting in the soil for someone to recognize their potential." As she spoke, the humming from the jars intensified. I noticed movement beneath the fabric of Karen's robe, something writhing beneath the surface as if her body contained the same creatures that swam in that central jar. I grabbed Dr. Reed's arm. "We need to leave," I hissed. "This isn't just mental illness." Karen's gaze snapped to me, suddenly sharp. "You're trying to stop the transformation." It wasn't a question. "You want to keep humanity trapped in its limited form." She moved with that unnatural fluidity toward the network of jars, reaching for a valve on one of the tubes. "Perhaps a demonstration will help you understand." "Karen, don't," I began, but it was too late. She turned the valve, and a fine mist sprayed from the tube, hanging in the air between us. The smell was overwhelming. Vinegar and rot and something else. Something ancient and wrong. "Out!" Dr. Reed shouted. Professional calm shattered. "Everyone out now!" We bolted for the door, Rusty leading the way. Behind us, Karen's laughter echoed, that multi-toned sound that wasn't just her voice anymore. Outside, the emergency response had expanded. More vehicles, more personnel in protective gear. Dr. Reed immediately reported to someone in a hazmat suit, gesturing frantically toward our house. I stood on the sidewalk, gasping for fresh air, Rusty pressed against my legs. One of the crisis team members approached me, her expression grave. "I've been a psychiatric nurse for 15 years, she said quietly. "That was not just mental illness." I nodded, unable to find words. The truth was too strange, too horrifying to articulate. My wife had become something else, something that was now spreading to our neighbors, perhaps beyond. A hazmat-suited figure approached us. "Sir, we need to decontaminate you and your dog. Please come with me." I followed numbly, Rusty trotting beside me. They led us to a makeshift decontamination tent, separating us from the crisis team. As technicians in full protective gear sprayed us down with some chemical solution, I caught a glimpse of our house through the tent flap. Karen stood in the doorway watching the proceedings with that alien smile. When she saw me looking, she raised one hand in a wave. The sleeve of her robe fell back, revealing an arm mottled with dark patches, the skin between them translucent enough to show movement underneath. Writhing, twisting movement. I grabbed my keys and told her I was going out for coffee. She nodded slowly and whispered, "Don't forget the SCOBY." I don't remember telling her I knew what that meant. The dog followed me, no leash, no command. He got into the passenger seat like he'd been waiting for this moment for years. We're at the cafe now. He's sitting beside me like a soldier returned from war. The barista asked if I wanted oat milk. I told him no. I have enough horror fermenting inside me already. I don't want to go back. but part of me knows I have to. The plants are dead, the scarf is growing, the fish has stopped moving again. But his eyes are still watching me, and my wife. She isn't my wife anymore. She's something else, something brewed. After decontamination, they put us in quarantine, a hastily established area in a nearby school gymnasium. Cots lined the walls, separated by makeshift dividers. Medical personnel in protective gear moved among the displaced residents, checking vital signs, administering tests. They'd allowed Rusty to stay with me after I'd refused to be separated from him. He lay beneath my cot now, eyes alert, still watching the door, as if expecting Karen to walk through it at any moment. My neighbor Michael occupied the cot beside mine. His skin was covered in a rash, angry red patches that matched the pattern I'd seen on Karen's body. He'd been one of the first to report symptoms. "It started 2 weeks ago," he told me, voice hoarse. "Dreams at first. Strange dreams about fermentation, about bacteria and growth. Then I started hearing things. Voices coming from the drains, from the walls. Singing, they said. Microbes singing." My blood ran cold. Like my wife described. He nodded wearily. "I thought I was losing my mind. Then I started craving weird things. Kombucha, sauerkraut. I've never even liked sauerkraut. But suddenly I was eating it by the jarful." "Did Karen give you any of her creations?" I asked. "A jar of kombucha," he admitted. "Said it was a special blend. I drank it to be polite." He touched one of the red patches on his arm. The rash started the next day. I looked around the gymnasium. At least 30 residents were being held here, most showing similar symptoms. Rashes, weight loss, strange behaviors. All from my neighborhood. All connected somehow to Karen's fermentation experiment. A doctor approached my cot, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Miller, we've got your preliminary test results." I sat up straight. "And?" "Your blood work shows elevated white cell counts, indicating some kind of infection or inflammatory response. But we haven't identified the pathogen yet." She glanced at her notes. "You said your wife has been experimenting with fermentation?" I nodded, recounting Karen's progression from sourdough starter to the network of vessels I'd seen in our living room. The doctor listened with clinical detachment, but I could see concern growing in her eyes. "We've contacted the CDC," she said finally. "They're sending a team. In the meantime, we're treating symptoms and trying to contain whatever this is." "My wife," I said. "Is someone checking on her?" "A hazmat team entered your house an hour ago. They found evidence of unusual biological activity, but your wife wasn't there." A chill ran through me. "What do you mean she wasn't there? Where could she go?" The doctor shook her head. "We don't know, but they're searching the neighborhood." She hesitated. "Mr. Miller, the team described finding a network of tubes and vessels containing unidentified biological material. They've taken samples for analysis." "And the fish?" I asked, remembering Neptune's strange transformation. "In the tank on the desk?" "There was no fish in the tank," she said, "just cloudy water." After the doctor left, I lay back on the cot, mind racing. Karen was gone, Neptune was gone, and whatever had been growing in our house was now being studied by scientists who probably couldn't begin to understand what they were dealing with. Rusty whined softly beneath the cot. I reached down to stroke his head, finding comfort in his solid presence. "We'll figure this out, boy," I whispered. "We'll find a way to help her." But even as I said the words, doubt gnawed at me. Was Karen still somewhere in that transformed body? Or had she been replaced entirely by whatever symbiotic horror she'd cultivated? Night fell. The gymnasium lights were dimmed but not extinguished. Around me, other quarantined residents tossed restlessly on their cots, some moaning in discomfort, others whispering to themselves, or to something I couldn't see. I must have dozed off eventually because suddenly I was jolted awake by Rusty's growl. He stood rigid beside my cot, hackles raised, staring at the main entrance to the gymnasium. The doors swung open. A figure entered, hazmat-suited, moving with the deliberate care of someone in protective gear. But something about the movement was wrong. Too fluid, too graceful. Rusty's growl deepened. Other dogs in the quarantine area joined in, creating a chorus of warning. The figure moved among the cots, pausing occasionally to examine a patient. None of the medical staff seemed to notice anything amiss. The suit concealed any identifying features, but I knew with bone-deep certainty, who was inside it. I lay perfectly still as the figure approached my section, heart hammering so loudly I was sure it must be audible. Rusty pressed against my side, still growling low in his throat. The figure stopped at the foot of my cot, head tilting in that curious way Karen had developed. Though I couldn't see her face behind the suit's visor, I felt her gaze on me. Cold, assessing, inhuman. She raised one gloved hand in greeting, then deliberately turned to examine Michael on the cot beside mine. He was sleeping fitfully, muttering in his dreams. The figure, Karen, placed a hand on his forehead in what might have looked like a medical check to a casual observer. But I saw what happened next. Something passed from the glove into Michael's skin, a subtle movement, like liquid flowing through a membrane. He gasped in his sleep, back-arching, then subsided into stillness. Karen straightened, turned back to me, and raised a finger to where her lips would be behind the visor. A gesture for silence. Then she moved on, continuing her rounds through the quarantine area. I lay frozen, unable to call out to warn anyone. By the time I gathered my courage to alert the medical staff, she was gone, slipping out a side exit. In the morning, Michael's cot was empty. The doctor explained that his symptoms had worsened overnight and he'd been transferred to the hospital for more intensive care. But I knew better. Whatever had been happening to Karen was now accelerating in Michael, and she had helped it along. By midday, the CDC team had arrived, serious-faced men and women in blue windbreakers, conferring in hushed tones with local officials. One of them, a woman with steel-gray hair pulled into a severe bun, came to interview me. Dr. Eliza Chen, she introduced herself. Pathogen Research Division. I understand your wife may be patient zero in this outbreak. I nodded, recounting Karen's fermentation experiments, her physical transformation, the network of vessels in our living room. Dr. Chen listened without interruption, taking notes in a small leather-bound book. And you said she found parasites in your garden? She asked when I'd finished. Can you describe them? Pale, elongated, like worms or larvae but larger, and they moved deliberately, like they were intelligent. She made another note. We found similar organisms in the samples from your house. They don't match any known parasite species. Our preliminary analysis suggests they may be a hybrid, part nematode, part fungal mycelium, which should be impossible. Nothing about this is possible, I said bitterly, and yet it's happening. Dr. Chen leaned forward, lowering her voice. Mr. Miller, I need you to understand the gravity of the situation. Whatever your wife has created, or discovered, is spreading. The affected individuals are showing signs of symbiotic integration with these organisms. Their biology is being rewritten. Can you stop it? Cure them? She hesitated. We're trying, but we need to find your wife. She may hold the key to understanding this process. She's not my wife anymore, I said quietly. She's something else now. Something brewed. Dr. Chen's expression softened slightly. Nevertheless, we need to locate her, both to help her and to contain this outbreak. After she left, I made a decision. I couldn't sit in quarantine any longer, not when Karen was out there, spreading this transformation to others. I needed to find her, to see if anything of my wife remained in that changed body. That night, when the medical staff was occupied with a new arrival showing severe symptoms, I slipped out of the gymnasium with Rusty. No one tried to stop us. The quarantine was more precautionary than enforced for those showing minimal symptoms. I had nowhere to go except a cafe I knew stayed open late, a 24-hour place frequented by college students and night shift workers. Rusty and I walked the 3 miles there, keeping to side streets to avoid the increasing number of emergency vehicles in the area. The cafe was nearly empty when we arrived, just a few students with laptops and a lone barista behind the counter. No one objected to Rusty's presence. He sat beside my table like a soldier returned from war, alert and watchful. The barista approached to take my order. "Rough night?" he asked, eyeing my disheveled appearance. "You could say that," I replied. "Just coffee, black?" "Sure you don't want to try our oat milk, we make it in-house." I shook my head firmly. "No. I have enough horror fermenting inside me already." He gave me an odd look but didn't press the issue. I sat nursing my coffee, trying to decide what to do next. I didn't want to go back to that quarantine center, to wait helplessly while whatever Karen had started spread further. But part of me knew I had to confront her, to see the transformation for myself, to understand what had happened to the woman I loved. The plants are dead. The scarf is growing. The fish has stopped moving again. But his eyes are still watching me. Those eyes. Neptune's eyes, pressing against the glass of his tank, mouthing that warning. Run. Had he been trying to save me? Had some part of him remained conscious through his transformation, fighting against whatever had invaded his body? And if that was possible for a fish, might it not be possible for Karen? Could some part of her still be in there, trapped, aware, fighting? My phone buzzed. A text from Jennifer. "Where are you? The CDC people are looking for you." I didn't respond. Instead, I opened my Maps app, studying the area around our neighborhood. The quarantine zone had expanded, covering several blocks now, but there were access points, service roads for utility workers, paths through the park that bordered our subdivision. I could get back in. I could find Karen. As if sensing my thoughts, Rusty whined softly, pressing his head against my leg. "I know, boy," I murmured. "It's dangerous. But she's still my wife. Somewhere in there, she's still Karen." The barista approached with a coffee pot for a refill. "Everything okay, man? You've been sitting here for hours." I glanced at my watch, surprised to find it was past midnight. "Yeah, just thinking." He nodded toward Rusty. "Your dog seems on edge. He's had a rough few days." I hesitated, then asked, "Have you heard about what's happening in Oakwood Heights? The quarantine? Some kind of bacterial outbreak, right? It's all over the news." He leaned in, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "My roommate's cousin lives there. Says it's not bacteria at all. Says people are changing, becoming something else." I felt a chill. "Changing how?" "Talking about microbes fermenting things, their skin getting weird." He shrugged. "Probably just rumors. You know how people exaggerate." But I knew it wasn't exaggeration. It was happening. Spreading beyond our immediate neighborhood, beyond the quarantine zone. I finished my coffee and stood, decision made. "Thanks for the coffee." "Heading home?" the barista asked. I looked down at Rusty, who stared back with solemn eyes, as if he understood the choice I was making. "Yes," I said finally. "I'm going home." We left the cafe and walked toward Oakwood Heights, staying on side streets, avoiding the occasional patrol car or emergency vehicle. The night was oddly still, the usual suburban sounds, distant traffic, dogs barking, teenagers' music, absent. As we neared the quarantine perimeter, I spotted the barricades and warning signs, the officials in protective gear checking identification. But I knew this area well. There was a walking path through the nature preserve that bordered our subdivision, connecting to the community garden plots where Karen and I had grown vegetables in happier times. It would be unguarded, or minimally so. I was right. The path was marked with warning tape but unmonitored. Rusty and I slipped past the barriers, moving quietly through the wooded area, emerging near the community gardens. Even in the moonlight, I could see something was wrong with the garden plots. The plants were dead or dying, withered as if poisoned. But among them, new growth had emerged, pale fungal structures that glistened wetly in the night air. Rusty growled low in his throat, refusing to walk among the blighted gardens. I didn't force him, instead skirting the perimeter, heading toward our street. The neighborhood was transformed. Houses dark, streets empty, an eerie silence hanging over everything. But there was life. Movement behind curtained windows, shadows passing across lawns, figures gathering in backyards around what looked like makeshift altars, similar to the one Karen had created in our living room. Our house stood apart, darker than the others, seemingly abandoned. But I knew better. I approached cautiously, Rusty following reluctantly, his body language screaming fear and resistance. The front door was ajar. I pushed it open slowly, listening for any sound within. The fermentation smell had intensified, become almost solid in the air. Breathing through my mouth, I stepped inside, fumbling for the light switch. Nothing happened. Power was out, or deliberately cut. I used my phone's flashlight, sweeping it across the entryway and into the living room. The network of vessels remained but had expanded, tubes now running up walls, across ceilings, connecting to new jars and containers that pulsed with activity. The central jar, the one with the parasites, had grown to the size of a small barrel, its contents moving continuously, like a living current. "Karen?" I called softly, moving deeper into the house. "Are you here?" A sound from upstairs, not a voice, but a soft, wet noise like something large moving through liquid. I hesitated at the foot of the stairs, torn between fear and the need to know. Rusty whined, pulling at his leash, trying to retreat. I knelt beside him. "Stay here, boy. Watch the door. Bark if anyone comes." I unclipped his leash, and he immediately backed into a corner, eyes fixed on the stairs, trembling but alert. I ascended slowly, phone light illuminating each step. The upper hallway was transformed, walls glistening with some viscous substance, the carpet spongy underfoot. The bathroom door was closed, but light filtered from beneath it, a soft, pulsing glow unlike any electric light. I approached cautiously, placing my hand on the doorknob. It was warm, almost hot to the touch, and seemed to vibrate subtly against my palm. "Karen?" I called again. "It's David. I've come back." No response, but the light beneath the door pulsed more rapidly, as if in recognition. I turned the knob slowly, pushing the door open. The bathroom had become a cocoon. Every surface was covered with that same fungal growth I'd seen in the garden, pale and glistening, pulsing with inner light. The bathtub was filled not with water, but with a thick, cloudy liquid that moved of its own accord, forming patterns and swirls. And suspended in the center of the room, in a hammock of translucent tendrils, hung Karen, or what had once been Karen. Her body was barely recognizable now, the robe having merged with her skin, creating a new integument that shifted between solid and liquid states. Her face remained somewhat human, but her eyes had changed, larger, reflective, with pupils that expanded and contracted like living apertures. Those eyes fixed on me now, widening in recognition. Her mouth opened, and what emerged was not a voice but a chorus, Karen's tone underlying a multitude of others, higher and lower, human and not. "David," the chorus said, "you came back." I stood frozen in the doorway, horror and fascination warring within me. "Karen, are you still in there?" She tilted her head, tendrils shifting to support the movement. "I am Karen, and I am more than Karen now." The chorus of voices modulated, becoming almost musical. "We are becoming something new, something better." "The parasites," I whispered. "They've taken over." "Not taken over. Joined with. Symbiosis, David. Perfect integration." She extended a hand toward me, fingers elongated, skin translucent enough to show movement beneath. "You can join us too. The transformation is beautiful." I backed away, bumping into the hallway wall. "This isn't right, Karen. This isn't natural." "Natural?" The chorus laughed, a sound like water rushing over stones. "Nature is change, evolution, adaptation. We're just accelerating the process." Her expression softened, becoming more recognizably Karen. "Don't you want to be with me? To understand what I've become?" For a moment I wavered. Despite the horror of her transformation, this was still Karen. My wife, my partner of 12 years. The woman who had nursed me through pneumonia, who had cried in my arms when her father died, who knew exactly how to make me laugh on my darkest days. "I want my wife back," I said finally. "The real Karen." Her expression hardened, alien once more. "I am the real Karen. Enhanced, evolved, and I'm not alone anymore." She gestured around her. "The neighborhood is joining us. Soon the city, then beyond." "The CDC knows," I said. "They're working on a way to stop this, to cure people." "There is no cure for evolution," the chorus intoned. "Only resistance or acceptance." She floated closer, tendrils extending toward me. "Join us willingly, David. It's easier that way, less painful." I backed further down the hallway. "And if I refuse?" "Then you'll join us unwillingly," she said simply. "The spores are everywhere now. In the air, in the water. You've been exposed since you entered the neighborhood." Her mouth stretched in that too wide smile. "It's already beginning inside you. Can't you feel it?" And I could. A subtle itching beneath my skin, a buzzing in my ears that might have been the beginning of that microbial singing Karen had described. Terror gripped me, sending me stumbling down the stairs. Rusty met me at the bottom, barking frantically. Above us, I heard movement, fluid, fast, inhuman. Karen was coming. I grabbed Rusty's leash and ran for the door, bursting outside into the night air. But the neighborhood had changed in the short time I'd been inside. Figures stood on lawns, in streets. Neighbors transformed or transforming, moving with that same fluid grace Karen had developed. They turned toward us as one, as if sensing our presence. Behind me, Karen appeared in the doorway, her form rippling and shifting in the moonlight. "The dog knows," she called, her chorus of voices carrying unnaturally far. "Animals sense the change first. That's why he's fighting so hard." She floated down the porch steps, tendrils extending like reaching hands. "Let him go, David. Join us." The transformed neighbors began to move toward us, slowly but inexorably, a tide of altered humanity closing in. Rusty barked once, sharp and commanding, then tugged at his leash, pulling me toward a narrow gap between houses. I followed, trusting his instincts, his desperate need to escape. We ran through backyards, across the blighted community gardens, back toward the nature preserve path. Behind us, pursuit, not running, but flowing, a coordinated movement of multiple entities acting as one. The quarantine checkpoint loomed ahead, now more heavily guarded. Officials in hazmat suits shouted as they spotted us emerging from the preserve. "Help!" I screamed, waving frantically. "They're coming!" Guns were raised, not at us, but at what followed, the tide of transformed neighbors led by Karen, her form now more fluid than solid in the moonlight. "Get behind the barricade!" someone shouted, and I complied, dragging Rusty with me. Shots were fired, warning shots at first, then with deadly intent as the transformed continued their advance undeterred. I caught a glimpse of Karen's face, still recognizable despite everything, those eyes finding mine across the growing chaos. For a moment, just a moment, I saw something there, a flicker of the woman I'd loved, trapped behind the alien gaze, fear, recognition, perhaps even regret. Then it was gone, subsumed again by the collective consciousness that had claimed her. The barricade erupted into frantic activity, officials shouting into radios, more personnel arriving, lights and sirens and the thrum of helicopter rotors overhead. Someone grabbed me, pulling me toward a medical tent. Rusty followed, still pressed against my leg. "Mr. Miller?" A familiar voice. Dr. Chen from the CDC. "We've been looking for you." "They're coming," I gasped. "Karen, the neighbors. They're changing, spreading." She nodded grimly. "We know. The containment protocols have been escalated." She guided me toward a quarantine tent. "You've been exposed. We need to decontaminate you and run tests." "Can you stop it?" I asked, desperate for some hope. "Can you reverse what's happening to them to Karen?" Dr. Chen's expression told me everything I needed to know. "We're trying, but this symbiosis, it's unprecedented. The integration is happening at a cellular level." I looked back toward the barricade where officials were deploying what looked like flamethrowers against the advancing transformed. "You're going to kill them." "We're going to contain them," she corrected firmly, "until we understand what we're dealing with." In the decontamination tent, as technicians sprayed Rusty and me with chemical solutions, I thought about Karen, about the woman she had been and the thing she had become, about the garden parasites that had somehow catalyzed this transformation, about the microbes singing in her blood. Later, in a quarantine bed more secure than the gymnasium, I felt it again, that subtle itching beneath my skin, that whisper at the edge of hearing, the beginning of change. Dr. Chen visited, reviewing my test results with clinical detachment. "The integration has begun," she confirmed, "but it's early stages. We're trying experimental treatments." "Will they work?" I asked. She hesitated. "We don't know. No one has recovered once the symbiosis reaches advanced stages, but you're different. Minimal exposure, strong immune response." "And Karen, the others?" "Contained," was all she would say. Days passed in quarantine. The itching subsided, then returned, stronger. The whispers grew louder. I began to understand what Karen had meant about the microbes singing. There was a strange beauty to it, a harmony I'd never noticed before. Rusty stayed with me, watched over by veterinarians monitoring him for signs of transformation. So far, he remained unchanged, resistant in ways human biology apparently wasn't. I dreamed of Karen nightly. Not the transformed Karen, but my wife as she had been. In the dreams, she stood in our kitchen, smiling normally, asking if I wanted tea. But when I reached for the cup, it was always filled not with tea, but with that cloudy kombucha teeming with life. 1 week into quarantine, Dr. Chen brought news. The containment zone is held. No new transformations outside the perimeter. "And inside?" I asked. "The process continues. They're building something in the center of the neighborhood. Some kind of structure. We're monitoring but not engaging directly." I thought of the network of vessels in our living room, expanded to neighborhood scale. "It's spreading," I said. "Even contained, it's growing stronger." She didn't disagree. That night, the singing in my blood grew louder. I woke sweating, feeling movement beneath my skin, subtle but unmistakable. The treatments weren't working. The transformation had merely been delayed. I looked at Rusty, sleeping at the foot of my bed, loyal despite everything. He would be alone soon, or they would euthanize him, fearing he might eventually transform too. I made my decision before dawn. When the nurse came with morning medications, I pretended to take them, hiding the pills under my tongue. I waited for the quiet hour between shift changes, then slipped from my room, Rusty following silently. The quarantine facility was less secure from the inside, designed to keep infection in, not to prevent determined patients from leaving. We found a service exit, triggered a fire alarm as distraction, and slipped away in the ensuing chaos. I had nowhere to go but forward, back to Karen, back to the transformation. Not to join willingly, but to understand. To see what humanity was becoming for better or worse. The containment zone was a militarized border now, fences, guards, surveillance equipment. But there were still gaps, still ways in for someone desperate enough. Rusty and I found one near dawn, slipping past sleeping guards, through a drainage culvert that hadn't been properly secured. Inside, the neighborhood had transformed completely. Houses stood empty, doors open, as if the residents had simply walked out one day and never returned. But there was life. New life. Strange life. The fungal growths had spread across lawns, up walls, creating a network that pulsed with inner light. The air was thick with spores, visible in the morning light like diamond dust. Rusty whined, but stayed with me, pressing close as we made our way toward our house. I knew Karen wouldn't be there. She would be at the center, at whatever structure they were building. But I needed to see, to understand what had happened in our home. The front door hung open. Inside, the network of vessels had expanded, covering every surface, pulsing with fluid that moved in coordinated patterns. The central jar was gone, presumably moved to the collective structure Dr. Chen had mentioned. I moved through the house in a daze, recognizing our possessions, photos, furniture, books, now integrated into the fungal network, becoming part of the new whole. In our bedroom, the bed remained, but the mattress was covered with a living membrane that rippled gently, as if breathing. On Karen's nightstand, untouched by the transformation, sat her wedding ring. She must have removed it as her fingers changed, elongated, became something no longer human. I picked it up, slipping it into my pocket, a talisman, a reminder of what had been. We left the house and moved toward the center of the neighborhood, where activity was visible even from a distance. A structure rose from what had once been the community park, organic, pulsing, growing, even as I watched. It resembled a tower or spire, but made of the same fungal material that had spread throughout the neighborhood. And around it, the transformed gathered. Neighbors, friends, strangers, all changed as Karen had been changed. Their forms varied in the degree of transformation, some still recognizably human, others altered beyond recognition. But they moved as one, working to expand the structure, to nurture its growth. I spotted Karen near the top of the spire, her form now more light than substance, tendrils extending to connect with the structure itself. She was becoming part of it, or it was becoming part of her. The distinction no longer seemed important. She sensed me somehow, her gaze turning unerringly in my direction. Even at this distance, I felt the weight of that gaze, alien yet familiar, inhuman yet still, somehow, Karen. The itching beneath my skin intensified. The whispers became a chorus. My vision blurred, then sharpened, revealing spectra I'd never seen before. I was changing, faster now that I was fully exposed again, becoming like them, like her. Rusty whined, pressing against my leg one last time. Then, with a final look of what could only be described as regret, he turned and ran, away from me, away from the transformation, back toward the perimeter and whatever lay beyond. I didn't try to stop him. He deserved a chance, even if it was only to die as a dog rather than become something else. Karen floated down from the spire, moving toward me with that fluid grace. The other transformed parted to let her pass, recognizing her status. The first, the originator, the mother culture from which all this had grown. She stopped before me, beautiful and terrible in her transformation. Her face still held echoes of the woman I'd loved, but transformed into something beyond human comprehension. "You came back," the chorus said. "Again." "I had to know," I replied, my voice already changing, harmonics emerging that hadn't been there before. "Had to see." She extended a tendril, touching my face gently. "The resistance is ending. You're joining us now." Not willingly, I managed, though the distinction seemed less important with each passing moment. Never willingly. "Willingness is a human concern," the chorus said. "The microbes don't require consent, only participation." I felt my skin beginning to change, to soften and shift. The singing in my blood had become a symphony, drowning out individual thought, individual fear. I fought to hold on to myself, onto my memories of Karen as she had been. "Is any part of you still her?" I asked, my words slurring as my mouth began to change. Any part still human? The being before me paused, head tilting in that curious way. For a moment, just a moment, I saw something flicker in those alien eyes. Recognition, regret, love. She is here, the chorus said, softer now. Part of the whole, as you will be. The fermentation, I whispered. It wasn't just kombucha. It was evolution, the chorus replied. The next step. Humanity has been isolated, individual for too long. We are becoming collective, becoming one. I felt myself slipping away, human consciousness subsumed by the growing chorus within. But before I surrendered completely, I reached into my pocket, fingers closing around Karen's wedding ring. I loved you, I said. To Karen, to the memory of her, to whatever part of her might still exist within the transformed being before me.
The being extended both tendrils now, enfolding me in what might have been an embrace. Love is not lost, the chorus said. It is transformed, expanded, like everything else. As the change overtook me, as my body surrendered to the new biology invading it, I had one final human thought, a question that would never be answered, at least not in terms a human mind could comprehend. Was this the end of humanity, or the beginning of something else? Something beyond our limited understanding of life and consciousness? The spire pulsed, growing higher, reaching toward the sky. Within it, billions of microorganisms sang in harmony, a symphony of transformation that was spreading, cell by cell, person by person, beyond the quarantine, beyond containment, into the wider world. Hope your morning's less fermented, and if it's not, don't drink the juice.
I never believed in ghosts. Not really. Sure, I'd read creepy stories online and watched my fair share of horror movies, but that was entertainment. Fiction designed to send shivers down your spine before you return to your perfectly normal, rational life. That changed the day I signed the lease on 42 Willow Lane. The house was a steal, a 2-story Victorian with hardwood floors, bay windows, and a wraparound porch. The real estate agent mentioned something about the previous tenants leaving unexpectedly, but I was too enchanted by the crown molding and built-in bookshelves to ask questions. Besides, with my new job starting and rent prices in the city skyrocketing, I couldn't afford to be picky. Just needs a little TLC, the agent had said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes as she handed me the keys. I should have noticed how quickly she left, how she glanced over her shoulder at the upstairs window before climbing into her car. My first week in the house was uneventful. I unpacked my belongings, arranged furniture, and settled into a comfortable routine. The creaks and groans of the old house were charming rather than concerning, just the natural sounds of a structure built in the 1890s. It was during my second week that things began to change. I was washing dishes one evening when the kitchen light flickered. Once, twice, then darkness. I fumbled for my phone to use as a flashlight, thinking it was just a blown bulb. As the beam cut through the darkness, I noticed something in the corner of my eye, a shadow that seemed to move independently of my own. "Hello?" I called out, feeling foolish even as the word left my lips. Nobody was there. I was alone in the house, but the prickling sensation on the back of my neck told me otherwise. I changed the light bulb and dismissed the incident. Old houses have quirks, I told myself. Bad wiring, drafty corners, perfectly rational explanations for what I'd experienced. The next morning, I woke to find all the kitchen cabinet doors standing open. I was certain I'd closed them the night before. I'm just forgetful, I reasoned, shutting each one with more force than necessary. That night, I jolted awake at exactly 3:17 a.m. The digital clock on my nightstand cast an eerie red glow across my bedroom. Something had woken me, a sound perhaps, though I couldn't place it. I lay still, listening intently to the silence of the house. Tap, tap, tap. There it was again. A gentle tapping, like fingernails against glass. It was coming from the hallway. My heart hammered in my chest as I debated whether to investigate. Tap, tap, tap. Louder this time, more insistent. I swallowed hard and reached for the baseball bat I'd started keeping beside my bed. "It's probably just a branch against a window," I whispered to myself, though there were no trees close enough to the house to reach the windows. I crept down the hallway, bat raised, phone flashlight illuminating the way. The tapping had stopped, but something else replaced it. A soft, almost imperceptible whisper. "Hello?" I called again, my voice trembling slightly. "Is someone there?" The whisper grew louder, though I couldn't make out any words. It was like listening to a conversation in another room, the cadence of speech without the clarity of language. I checked every room, every closet, every possible hiding place. Nothing. I was alone. Or so I thought. As I turned to head back to bed, exhausted and on edge, the temperature in the hallway plummeted. My breath clouded in front of me, and a chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. I felt a presence behind me, an undeniable sense of being watched. I spun around, bat raised, but the hallway was empty. The cold spot dissipated as quickly as it had formed, leaving me shaking and questioning my sanity. Sleep did not come easily for the remainder of the night. The following day, I researched the history of 42 Willow Lane. The local library had newspaper archives dating back to the house's construction. I told myself I was just curious, that I wasn't actually looking for evidence of a haunting. Yet my hands trembled slightly as I scrolled through microfiche records. What I found made my blood run cold. In 1972, a family of 4 had lived in the house, the Martins. According to the yellowed newspaper clipping, Richard Martin had murdered his wife and 2 children before taking his own life. The article was sparse on details, but mentioned that the bodies were found throughout the house, with Richard's body discovered in the hallway outside what was now my bedroom. I felt sick. The tapping, the whispers, the cold spot. They had all been in that hallway. That evening, I called my friend Emma, trying to keep my voice steady as I relayed what I'd experienced and discovered. "You should get out of there," she said, concern evident in her voice. "Come stay with me for a few days." I appreciated the offer but declined. "It's probably just my imagination running wild after reading about the house's history," I said, not entirely believing it myself. "Just be careful," Emma warned, "and call me if anything else happens." I promised I would, and hung up, feeling slightly better after talking to someone rational. I decided to take a hot shower to calm my nerves. As steam filled the bathroom, I stepped under the spray, letting the water wash away the tension in my shoulders. That's when I noticed it. A handprint on the fogged mirror. A small handprint like that of a child. I froze, water cascading down my back as I stared at the clear impression in the steam. It hadn't been there when I entered the bathroom. I was certain of it. My shower cut short. I wrapped myself in a towel and approached the mirror with trepidation. The handprint was already fading as the steam dissipated. I reached out and placed my own hand next to it, noting how much smaller the mysterious print was. A child's hand, like one of the Martin children. I backed out of the bathroom, heart racing, and bumped into something solid behind me. I whirled around, dreading to see someone there. But the hallway was empty. Yet I had definitely collided with something that felt like a person. I slept with my light on that night, jumping at every creak and groan of the house. Around midnight, my bedroom door slowly swung open. I watched, paralyzed with fear, as it moved on its hinges without any visible force. "Who's there?" I managed to croak out. Silence answered me, but the air in the room changed, became heavier, charged with an energy I couldn't explain. My bedside lamp flickered, then dimmed, casting elongated shadows across the walls. In the corner of my room, the shadows seemed to coalesce, forming a vaguely human shape. I couldn't make out features, just a darker patch of darkness that seemed to pulse with malevolent intent. "What do you want?" I whispered, clutching my blanket like a shield. The shadow moved, not toward me, but toward the door, as if beckoning me to follow. Against every instinct for self-preservation, I found myself sliding out of bed. My legs moved of their own accord, following the shadow into the hallway. the same hallway where Richard Martin had died. The shadow led me to a door I hadn't opened since moving in, the door to the basement. It had been locked, and the agent had mentioned the key was lost years ago. Yet now the door stood ajar, a yawning darkness beyond. The shadow disappeared down the stairs, and I hesitated at the threshold. Every horror movie I'd ever seen screamed at me not to follow, to run, to get out of the house. But a morbid curiosity kept me rooted to the spot, peering into the gloom. "Hello?" I called down, my voice echoing in the darkness. A child's laugh answered me, high and innocent yet chilling in its unexpectedness. It was followed by a woman's hushed voice, too quiet to make out words. I took a step back, ready to flee, when the basement door slammed shut with such force that the entire house seemed to shudder. I heard the distinct click of a lock engaging, though I knew there was no key. Something was in my house. Something was playing with me, testing me, perhaps even threatening me, and I was completely alone. I retreated to my bedroom, barricading the door with my dresser, and spent the night with my back pressed against the headboard, jumping at every sound. When dawn finally broke, I resolved to learn more about what I was dealing with and how to make it stop. The following day, I called in sick to work and drove to the county records office. I needed to know more about the house and the tragedy that had occurred there. The clerk was hesitant when I mentioned the address, but eventually pulled the files I requested. "Not many people ask about that place," she said, eyeing me curiously. "You're not thinking of buying it, are you?" "I already live there," I replied, noting how her expression shifted to one of concern. "Oh, honey," she said softly. "How long have you been there?" 2 weeks. "Why?" She hesitated, then pushed the files toward me. "No reason. Just be careful is all." The files contained more detailed information about the Martin family. Richard had been a respected doctor, his wife Claire a schoolteacher. Their children, Emma and James, were 8 and 6 respectively. By all accounts, they were a happy family until they weren't. Richard had begun acting strangely about a month after moving into 42 Willow Lane. Colleagues reported him becoming withdrawn and irritable. He started missing work, claiming to hear voices in the house. Claire had apparently confided in a friend that Richard would have conversations with people who weren't there, and that the children had begun speaking of an invisible friend who lived in the basement. The police report of the murders was gruesome. Richard had killed his family methodically, room by room, before ending his own life in the upstairs hallway. But what chilled me most was his suicide note, included in the file. "I have to stop them from coming through. They're using the children. The doorway must be sealed." What doorway? What was coming through? The note raised more questions than it answered. As I was replacing the files, a newspaper clipping fell out, older than the ones about the Martin family, yellowed with age. It was from 1943 and detailed another tragedy at 42 Willow Lane. A woman named Eleanor Blackwood had hanged herself in the basement after claiming the house was infested with spirits. My hands shook as I read further. The house had been built on land that was once part of a cemetery. During construction, several graves had been disturbed, but the developer had hushed it up, reinterring the remains elsewhere without proper ceremony. I left the records office with a knot of dread in my stomach. My house wasn't just haunted by the Martin family. It was built on desecrated ground. Multiple tragedies had occurred there, and I was living in the middle of it all. When I returned home, I sat in my car for several minutes, staring at the house. It looked so normal in the daylight, charming even, with its gingerbread trim and welcoming porch. It was hard to reconcile its innocent appearance with the horrors I now knew had occurred inside. Finally, I mustered the courage to go in. The house felt different now that I knew its history, oppressive, watchful. The air inside was stale and cold despite the summer heat outside. I went directly to the basement door, which was once again firmly closed and locked. I pressed my ear against it, listening for any sound from below. Nothing but silence greeted me. That night I decided to confront whatever was in the house. I set up a voice recorder in the hallway and sat cross-legged on the floor, a circle of salt surrounding me, a protective measure I'd read about online. I know you're here, I said to the empty house. I know about the Martins and about Eleanor Blackwood. I know this house is built on old graves. The temperature dropped immediately, and the lights flickered. My breath clouded in front of me. I just want to understand, I continued, fighting to keep my voice steady. Why are you still here? What do you want? The voice recorder emitted a high-pitched squeal, making me jump. Then silence, but not complete silence. There was a faint sound like someone breathing very close to my ear. Richard? I whispered. Claire? Emma or James? The breathing stopped, replaced by a child's giggle, the same laugh I'd heard from the basement. James? I tried again. Is that you, James? The giggle faded, and something cold brushed against my cheek. I flinched, but remained in my salt circle. You don't have to be afraid, I said, though I was terrified. I'm not here to hurt you. The voice recorder squealed again, then began to play back a distorted voice. Not James. My heart pounded. Who then? Emma. Another squeal, louder this time. Older than them. I swallowed hard. Eleanor. The lights went out completely, plunging the hallway into darkness. The voice recorder screeched, a sound like nails on a chalkboard that made me cover my ears. Below. The voice was clearer now, but it wasn't coming from the recorder. It seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. We are below. The basement door creaked open, a rectangle of deeper darkness in the already black hallway. You disturbed us. The voice was raspy, ancient, filled with malice. Now, we rise. Something moved in the darkness of the basement doorway, not a shadow this time, but a figure. Tall, emaciated, with limbs too long to be human. I couldn't see it clearly, but I felt its gaze on me, hungry and hateful. I scrambled backward, breaking the salt circle in my haste to get away. The temperature plummeted further, frost forming on the walls and floor. The figure took a step forward, emerging partially from the basement doorway. In the dim light, I could make out bones. Old yellowed bones held together by wisps of decaying flesh and animated by something I couldn't comprehend. This wasn't the ghost of Richard Martin or his family. This was something older, something that had been disturbed when the house was built, something that had driven the previous occupants to madness and murder. I ran to my bedroom and slammed the door, pushing my dresser against it again. Trembling, I pulled out my phone to call Emma, but there was no signal. Of course not. Whatever was in the house wouldn't make escape that easy. I huddled on my bed, listening to the sounds of movement in the hallway, shuffling steps, scratching at my door, whispers in a language I didn't recognize. The scratching grew more insistent, the wood of my door beginning to splinter. In desperation, I searched online for ways to banish spirits. Salt hadn't worked. What else was there? I found a banishing ritual that required candles and specific words. I had candles in my emergency kit, but would the ritual actually work? I had no choice but to try. I set up the candles in a circle around my bed and lit them with shaking hands. The scratching at my door paused momentarily, as if whatever was out there was curious about what I was doing. I began to recite the words of the ritual, my voice gaining strength as I progressed. The temperature in the room fluctuated wildly, freezing one moment, sweltering the next. The candle flames grew, then shrank, then turned an unnatural blue color. I banish you from this place, I intoned, trying to project confidence I didn't feel. You have no power here. Return to your rest and trouble this house no more. A howl of rage shook the house, not from the hallway, but from directly beneath my feet. The floor trembled and a crack appeared in the hardwood, snaking across my bedroom floor toward my bed. The ritual wasn't working. It was making things worse. The crack widened, and a putrid smell wafted up from below, the stench of old graves and disturbed earth. Bony fingers emerged from the crack, grasping at the edges, trying to widen it further. I abandoned the ritual and leapt from the bed, making for the window. It was a long drop to the ground, but better than staying in the house. As I struggled to open the window, which seemed suddenly stuck, I heard my bedroom door splinter behind me. I turned to see the emaciated figure standing in the doorway, more visible now in the candlelight. It wasn't alone. Behind it were other shapes, the misty outlines of what might have been the Martin family, but with eyes that glowed with an otherworldly light. They weren't victims. They were vessels, puppets for the ancient thing that had emerged from beneath the house. You cannot leave. The voice seemed to come from all of them at once, a discordant chorus that made my ears ache. You belong to us now. The window finally gave way, and I tumbled out onto the porch roof below. Behind me, I heard the entities howl in frustration. I scrambled across the roof and jumped to the ground, twisting my ankle but managing to stay upright. I limped to my car, fumbling with the keys as I looked back at the house. Faces pressed against every window, not just the entities I'd seen in my bedroom, but dozens of them, generations of victims claimed by whatever lurked beneath 42 Willow Lane. I drove away, not stopping until I reached Emma's apartment on the other side of town. She took one look at my face and pulled me inside, demanding to know what had happened. I told her everything, expecting disbelief, but she listened without interruption. "You can stay here as long as you need," she said when I'd finished. "But what about your things?" I shuddered at the thought of returning to the house. "They can stay there. I don't want any of it anymore." That night, sleeping on Emma's couch, I dreamed of 42 Willow Lane. In the dream, I was in the basement, facing a gaping hole in the earth. Skeletal hands reached out from the darkness and voices whispered promises of power, if I would only help them fully emerge into the world. I woke in a cold sweat, uncertain if it had been merely a nightmare or something more, a continued connection to whatever had claimed the house. One thing was certain: I would never go back to 42 Willow Lane. Let someone else discover its secrets. Let someone else become its next victim. But as I drifted back to sleep, a troubling thought occurred to me. What if it wouldn't let me go so easily? What if, by living there even briefly, I had somehow become linked to whatever dwelled beneath the house? What if it could follow me? I pushed the thought aside and closed my eyes, trying not to notice the slight chill that had crept into Emma's apartment, or the faint scratching sound coming from somewhere in the walls. 3 days had passed since my escape from 42 Willow Lane. I was settling into a temporary routine at Emma's apartment, trying to convince myself that the horrors I'd experienced were behind me. I'd called my landlord and broken my lease, citing unsafe living conditions. He hadn't argued, and his lack of surprise spoke volumes. But something wasn't right. The nightmares continued. Vivid dreams of the basement, of skeletal hands reaching for me, of voices calling my name. I'd wake gasping for breath, sheets damp with sweat. Emma was concerned but supportive, though I could tell my presence was beginning to strain our friendship. On the 4th night, I woke to find frost patterns on the inside of Emma's living room window, delicate crystalline formations despite the summer heat outside. My breath clouded in front of me as I sat up on the couch, a familiar dread settling in my stomach. It had followed me. From the corner of the living room came a soft, rhythmic tapping. Tap, 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 just like in the hallway of 42 Willow Lane. "No," I whispered, pulling my blanket tighter around me. "You can't be here." The tapping stopped, replaced by the sound of breathing, slow and deliberate, like something savoring my fear. "Emma," I called out, my voice cracking. "Emma, wake up." No response from her bedroom. The temperature dropped further, and the shadows in the corner began to move, coalescing into that too tall, too thin figure I'd seen in my house. "Found you." The raspy voice slithered through the darkness. "Cannot escape us." I stumbled to Emma's bedroom door, pounding on it frantically. "Emma, please, wake up." When I finally pushed the door open, Emma's bed was empty. A note lay on her pillow. "Went to stay with Mark for the night. Help yourself to anything in the fridge, back tomorrow. E. I was alone with the entity. Panic threatened to overwhelm me, but a strange calm settled over me instead. Running hadn't worked. I needed to confront this thing, to understand it, to find a way to end its hold over me. I turned to face the living room, where the entity now stood fully formed in the moonlight streaming through the window. Behind it were the misty outlines of others, the Martin family, Eleanor Blackwood, and faces I didn't recognize. Generations of victims. "What do you want from me?" I demanded, forcing strength into my voice. The entity tilted its head, a gesture almost curious. "You opened the way." "What way? I didn't do anything." "Blood, of your blood, disturbed us. Generations ago." The entity's voice grated like stone on stone. "Now, you will complete the circle." A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the cold in the room. "What are you talking about?" The entity raised a skeletal hand, pointing at me. "Blackwood, blood, runs in you." Eleanor Blackwood, the woman who had killed herself in the basement in 1943. Could I possibly be related to her? My grandmother's maiden name had been Blackwood, but I'd never made the connection. "You're saying Eleanor was my ancestor?" I asked, mind racing. The entity made a sound like dry leaves rustling, a laugh. "She tried to close the door, failed. Now, you will open it fully." Everything clicked into a horrible place. The cemetery that had been disturbed during the house's construction, Eleanor's suicide in the basement, the Martin family tragedy, all connected to whatever ancient evil had been unearthed when the first shovel broke ground at 42 Willow Lane. And now it claimed I was meant to open the door fully, to release whatever was partially trapped beneath the house into our world. "I won't help you," I said firmly. "Whatever you are. Whatever you want, I refuse." The entity moved closer, its movements jerky and unnatural. "Not your choice." It reached for me, bony fingers extended. I backed away until I hit the wall with nowhere left to go. The cold was unbearable now, painful against my skin. In desperation, I remembered something from my research. Entities like this fed on fear. They gained strength from terror. I closed my eyes and focused on calming my racing heart, on pushing back against the fear that threatened to consume me. "You have no power over me," I said, opening my eyes to stare directly at the entity. "I am not afraid of you." It wasn't entirely true, but I poured every ounce of conviction I could muster into the words. The entity hesitated, the misty figures behind it flickering like a television with poor reception. "We will have you," it insisted, but its voice seemed weaker, less certain. I continued, gaining confidence. "You are bound to 42 Willow Lane, to the land it was built on. You cannot follow me. You cannot touch me. I reject you and your influence over my life." The entity writhed, its form becoming less distinct. The temperature in the room began to rise slightly. I was onto something. "I am not Eleanor," I pressed on. "I am not bound by her actions or her fate. The circle ends with me. I close the door you've been trying to open." The entity let out a shriek that made my ears ring, lunging toward me with unexpected speed. I stood my ground, repeating, "You have no power over me," like a mantra. Its skeletal hand passed through me rather than grasping me, its influence weakening. The misty figures behind it were fading, dissipating like fog in morning sunlight. I felt a surge of triumph, but it was premature. The entity, though weakened, wasn't defeated. It changed tactics, its form shifting, becoming smaller, more human-like. A child stood before me now, James Martin, his eyes pleading. "Help us," he said in a child's voice, nothing like the raspy tones of the entity. "We're trapped. We can't move on." I faltered, my resolve weakening at the sight of the child. Was this a trick, Or was there some truth to it? Were the spirits of the Martin family actually trapped, used as puppets by the older, darker entity? "James," I whispered, "is that really you?" The child nodded, tears streaming down his translucent face. "The bad thing under the house won't let us go. It wants to use you to get out. But you could help us instead. You could set us free." I hesitated, torn between suspicion and compassion. "How? How can I help you?" "Come back to the house," James said, his voice taking on an edge that wasn't childlike at all. "Come to the basement. Complete the ritual Eleanor began." The facade was slipping. This wasn't James. It was still the entity, trying a new approach. "No," I said firmly. "I will not go back to that house. I will not help you. The Martin family, Eleanor, all the others. If they're trapped, I'll find another way to help them. But not by letting you into our world." The child's form twisted, elongating back into the skeletal entity. Its rage was palpable, the air around it shimmering with malevolent energy. Then, "We take you." It lunged again, but this time I was ready. I'd noticed that when I rejected it, when I stood firm against its influence, it weakened. The power was in my belief, in my refusal to succumb to fear. "I banish you," I declared, standing straight and facing it directly. "Return to 42 Willow Lane. Return to the earth. You have no claim on me or my bloodline. The circle is broken." The entity shrieked again, its form beginning to unravel. The misty figures behind it were gone now, leaving only the skeletal horror before me. It thrashed, reaching for me with diminishing substance. "Not over," it rasped, its voice fading. "We'll wait for another..." And then it was gone, the temperature in the room returning to normal. The frost on the window melted, leaving droplets of water that reflected the dawn light beginning to creep through the blinds. I collapsed onto the couch, exhausted but triumphant. I had faced the entity and survived. I had rejected its claim on me and broken whatever connection it had tried to establish. But its final words lingered. "We'll wait for another." The entity was still there beneath 42 Willow Lane, waiting for someone else to move in, someone else it could manipulate and use. I couldn't let that happen. In the days that followed, I researched rituals for cleansing and sealing haunted locations. I consulted with a local medium, who confirmed my suspicions. The entity beneath 42 Willow Lane was ancient, predating the cemetery that had once occupied the land. The disturbance of the graves had weakened whatever had been keeping it contained. We assembled a team, the medium, a local historian familiar with the area's past, and a priest who specialized in deliverance ministry. Emma insisted on coming too, despite my protests. "After what happened in my apartment, I'm already involved," she said. "Besides, you shouldn't face this alone." 2 weeks after my escape, we returned to 42 Willow Lane. The house looked abandoned already, an air of neglect settling over it despite the short time it had been empty. Dead leaves gathered on the porch, and the windows were dark and lifeless. As we approached the front door, I felt resistance, not physical, but a pressure against my mind urging me to turn back, to run. The entity was aware of our presence and our intentions. "It's fighting already," the medium said softly. "It knows why we're here." The priest nodded grimly. "Then we proceed as planned. No hesitation, no fear." We entered the house, and I was immediately struck by how different it felt. Hostile, alien, not even pretending to be a normal home anymore. The air was thick with the smell of decay, and shadows moved in corners where no light reached. We went directly to the basement door, which swung open at our approach, a yawning darkness beyond. The entity wanted us to descend, wanted me, specifically, to enter its domain. "It's trying to complete what it started with you," the medium warned. "Stay behind us." The historian spoke up, consulting his notes. According to records, this area was considered sacred ground by indigenous peoples long before European settlement. They avoided it, believing it to be a thin place, a location where the barrier between worlds was weak. The priest unfolded a cloth containing blessed items: salt, water, oils, candles. Then we strengthen that barrier. We seal the breach. We descended into the basement, flashlights cutting through the gloom. It was a simple space: concrete floors, stone walls, exposed pipes and beams. But in the center of the floor was a crack, the same kind of crack that had appeared in my bedroom during my last night in the house. From this crack emanated a cold so intense it burned. The flashlight beam seemed swallowed by the darkness surrounding it. "There," the medium said unnecessarily. "That's the doorway." The entity didn't wait for us to begin. The temperature plummeted, and the misty figures I'd seen before materialized around us. The Martin family, Eleanor Blackwood and others, dozens of lost souls trapped by the entity's influence. "Leave this place." The familiar raspy voice echoed from the crack. "She belongs to us." "She belongs to no one but herself," the priest responded, beginning to sprinkle blessed salt around the crack in the floor. "And these souls you've ensnared deserve peace." The entity howled, and the house shook with its rage. The historian stumbled, nearly falling into the crack, but Emma caught him, pulling him back. "Hurry," the medium urged. "It's gathering strength." The priest continued the ritual, anointing the edges of the crack with oil while reciting prayers of binding and banishment. I joined in where instructed, my voice gaining strength as we progressed. The entity fought back viciously. Objects flew across the basement: old tools, pieces of wood, anything not secured. One particularly large piece of lumber struck the priest, knocking him down. Blood trickled from a cut on his forehead, but he struggled to his feet, determined to continue. "Eleanor tried to seal it alone," the medium shouted over the cacophony of noises emanating from the crack. "That's why she failed. This takes multiple people, multiple faiths, multiple beliefs, all focused on the same goal." I understood then why the entity had targeted me specifically. As Eleanor's descendant, I was connected to her failed attempt. It believed I could be manipulated into reversing what she had tried to do, opening the doorway fully instead of sealing it. The priest completed the circle of salt and oil around the crack, and we positioned ourselves at cardinal points around it. The ritual reached its climax as we recited the final words of binding in unison. The entity's rage was transcendent. The very foundations of the house groaned under the pressure of its fury. The misty figures of its victims swirled around us in a macabre dance, their faces contorted in silent screams. "You cannot bind us." The entity's voice was fracturing, becoming a chorus of different tones and timbres. "We are eternal." "Nothing is eternal," I responded, my voice steady. "Not even you. Return to your slumber. Leave these souls in peace." A blinding light erupted from the crack, forcing us to shield our eyes. When it faded, the crack was sealed, not just filled in, but gone entirely, as if it had never existed. The temperature in the basement returned to normal, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. The misty figures remained, but they were different now, clearer, more defined, more human. They were free of the entity's influence. One by one, they faded away, moving on to whatever awaited them beyond this life. The Martin family went together, holding hands as they disappeared. Eleanor Blackwood was the last to go, giving me a nod of acknowledgement before she too faded from sight. We stood in silence for a moment, processing what we had witnessed. The historian was the first to speak. "It's done," he said simply. "The doorway is sealed." The medium nodded in agreement. "The house feels empty now, peaceful." We made our way back upstairs and out of the house. In the daylight, 42 Willow Lane looked ordinary again, just an old Victorian in need of some care. But I knew it would never be just a house to me. "What happens now?" Emma asked as we stood on the sidewalk, looking back at the place that had nearly claimed my sanity and my life. "Now," said the priest, "we ensure this doesn't happen again. The seal we placed is strong, but over time it could weaken. I'll document everything," the historian promised. "Make sure the true history of this place isn't forgotten." The medium touched my arm gently. "And you? What will you do now?" I took a deep breath, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. "Move on. Start over somewhere new." I paused, then added, "But I'll check on this place occasionally. Make sure everything stays quiet." As we drove away from 42 Willow Lane, I glanced in the rearview mirror for one last look at the house. For a moment, just a brief, heart-stopping moment, I thought I saw a figure in the upstairs window, but it was gone so quickly I convinced myself it was just a trick of the light. Still, I made a mental note to return in a month just to be sure. Some doors, once opened, require constant vigilance to keep closed, and as much as I wanted to put 42 Willow Lane and its horrors behind me, I knew that a part of me would always be connected to it, and to the ancient entity that slumbered beneath it, waiting for another chance to break free. For now, though, it was contained. The whispers were silenced. The house stood empty and quiet, its secrets buried once more. But I would be watching. I would be ready, because some things refuse to stay buried forever.